I can get you a good rate up the Great Northern.
Sold.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump right in because I have no plan. And this is the episode and this is the scene that gives birth to the legendary quotation, right?
Yeah.
The owls are not what they seem. And I believe this is the first time we hear it, although I could be wrong. And what does that mean? In the context of the show, or just in your own opinion, or we'll just dive in. The owls are not what they seem, says the giant. Any thoughts?
Well, my interpretation is that it references that they are, you know, like I guess you could say emergency vessels for the lodge spirits. That's how I always read it. They can surveil people through these owls, and I think you might. Is it true that after that, sometime after that scene, you get the scenes where like hearing owls is almost like instills a scene of like a bit of paranoia in people.
Right.
You remember if that's before or after that moment?
Yeah, including the viewers. Yeah. Okay, so they're sort of like portals that others can communicate through in some way, or utilize in some way to do some scoping out or some communicating.
Or I mean, I guess my interpretation too is that after he leaves Leland, he take Bob's spirit takes a temporary shelter, if you will, in an owl. Is something I kind of have always interpreted.
Yeah, because we get that shot of the owl sort of like coming right at us, and it's interesting that it's coming right at right at us.
I believe that's Bob's POV. Yeah.
So the owl is coming at Bob.
Yeah, I believe he's like he's called it. Is how I always interpret it.
Oh, that's interesting. Interesting. I had never thought of it that way, and that's why I like doing this kind of stuff because I haven't thought it so much, and I always get a different take. But Tommy, do you have any thoughts on the owls are not being what they seem?
Yeah, I immediately leap for yes, it's true in narrative. I think Andrew's hit it on the head. So what we've got is you've got parallels to animal life, correct? And whether they be vessels or they be reinterpretations, but I think vessels is probably most accurate. But atop of that, I believe that there's a suggestion that everything too has a shadow and that everything has a different reflection. Nothing, I mean, for all intents and purposes, nothing is what it seems, right? And while it's easy to like espouse that, it's sort of it's phrased almost as a metaphor that
Say hi.
Well, hello.
Hello from Vivian, guys.
Hey.
Is that
How are you?
Is that the bass player?
Yes, this is the legendary bass player.
That's awesome.
Yeah. She's gonna learn it.
That's great. I can't wait.
And she brought me a plate of fries. So
dude.
Thanks, honey.
See, this is what I got for putting my kids to bed. What was I thinking?
Love you. Bye, hon.
Bye.
Tell mommy thank you.
So I didn't realize you were on the meeting.
It's okay.
All right,
See ya.
love you.
Sorry.
Bye.
It's
but that's interesting because yeah, go ahead.
That's me going into my Jungian spiel, right? Like it's there's a there's a perspective by which it's almost touted as a metaphor for him to see that nothing is in fact as it seems, which I believe is the nature of this scene in question entirely. I believe that the nature of this scene that we're watching, and I'm sure we'll get into that, but I believe that it's derivative on purpose in a multitude of fashions and that the giant is in some way calling attention to the fact that none of those things are what they seem, right? And then the symbolic emblem of Twin Peaks itself is not what it seems. That's referring to an owl, right? Because that is the overall. If you had a symbol for Twin Peaks, it would be that symbol, right? Metaphorically.
Well, oftentimes if somebody's gonna like post something on social media or tweet something, and they want to indicate that it's a Twin Peaks reference, they'll put a little owl emoji. That's like
Right.
one of the first choices, or coffee. And that's interesting because in some ways the owls are not what they seem is sort of representative of the show at large and not just owls. It's just kind of
Yeah.
that phrase that you associate with the Twin Peaks vibe in one way or another.
What's interesting
And,
too, because I mean, like,
yeah.
even if you used, like, say like the two mountains, people might also use for Twin Peaks. I mean,
Yeah.
even that, I mean, it's not what it seems, right? Because I mean, you don't think of, when you first start the show, you don't think that it's going to become a pretty serious and heady discussion of like the concepts of duality, right? The duality of Laura Palmer, the duality of Dale Cooper, as he, splits off, and then into the third season. So much of the show turns out to be like not what it seems, in a way that is deeper and kind of like atavistic in that kind of Jungian sense, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
Well, I know when I started watching Twin Peaks, I did not pick up on the whole twin concept until probably after even the first season. Like, I'm clicking on Twin Peaks, or I'm putting in a Twin Peaks DVD. I'm saying Twin Peaks over and over again. And yet the whole like sort of twinning thing like wasn't sinking in right away, which is a little strange because you'd think that might be right in the foreground. But is Joel here?
Yeah, I figured I'd drop in for a little bit. Probably not the whole
Hey,
time,
Joel.
but
Yeah, no,
how's it
I know
going?
you got a busy night, but nice to
Well,
see you.
it's funny actually. I was reminded that it was happening because I've been watching Lynch weather reports for my upcoming video, and in one of them he just says, "I just want to sit here in silence with you for a few minutes," and he just sits there silently. I'm like, man, this reminds me of the season 2 premiere, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. They're having the chat tonight. I should jump in.
Interesting.
So
Perfect.
yeah,
I'm glad
I'll
you
jump in
remembered.
for a little bit.
Well, I'll just catch you up on the first question was the very famous line, "The owls are not what they seem." I was just asking for people's thoughts on that, if you think it's sort of straightforward or if you just have any associations, etc.
It's funny because it's such a Lynch associated line, and yet he has said, "Oh, that was all Mark Frost." So
Okay.
I almost kind of have to recalibrate my, assumption of where that might be coming from on that info. But I mean, maybe this is a little boring to get too literal about it, but I know it comes from the movie, or the book rather, Communion. I believe that Mark Frost was really interested in, about a guy who's abducted by aliens in the woods of New York.
Okay.
And then they made a movie out of it with Christopher Walken, which I saw a few years ago, which is very strange, very it aligns very well with Twin Peaks. A lot of stuff happening in it. There's like a whole Black Lodge kind of scenario at one point,
Okay.
basically. So that's kind of a fascinating tangent to go down that I'd encourage people to investigate. But yeah, I think it's that kind of boomerang thing Frost does, where he kind of flirts with the idea that this is a UFO thing. Then he pulls away from that and kind of brings it back to literally back down to Earth, which is interesting because Communion kind of does that as well. Ultimately, it suggests that these aren't aliens, but some sort of interdimensional beings that have are like entangled in the guy's own psyche. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Interdimensional beings that are entangled in the guy's own psyche.
Yeah, and they're really wild, like costume puppet type things that the aliens. I would definitely recommend people look into it. Reactions may vary, but it's certainly interesting.
Well, just for Christopher Walken alone.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a bit of an aside, but Communion will be essentially parodied in what's arguably the best X-Files episode that they ever did.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Which one is that?
Jose Chung's From Outer Space.
I've never seen an X-Files episode, believe it or not. But I am going to read something, and
Have
it's
you ever
brief.
seen an episode of Perfect Strangers? It's essentially the same show. You know?
Well, Balky Bartokimus was my nickname for quite a while.
Sorry about that.
I'm going to read, let's see, I'm going to paraphrase. So the interdimensional beings might not necessarily be aliens, but something akin to the manifestations of intuition. So forget where I got that from. But I thought that was an interesting take on with these interdimensional beings. And we're going to start by maybe presuming that the waiter and the giant are just that, maybe, or maybe one or both of them, or neither. But I thought that was an interesting, like, kind of hypothesis on what interdimensional beings could be. Do you guys have any other thoughts? Like, if not straight up aliens, what
The
that phrase
concept of
interdimensional being could be?
I don't know where you heard that, but that does fit with this concept of like the like the unified field, like a very Lynchian concept, right? So that is just pretty interesting.
How so?
Well, I mean, like you mentioned the possibility of these kind of beings as like a manifestation of intuition, and Lynch is always talking about ideas kind of existing beyond, you know what I mean, in that kind of unified field, and being kind of as he puts it, like caught, so it is kind of it's an interesting consideration that they might present these beings that way, as well, from some shared wellspring, you know what I mean, of consciousness or something.
Well,
Yeah, that is interesting.
That's that interesting intersection between Lynch and Frost, where you can interpret everything that you just said and then add the term collective unconscious or personal unconscious if we're actually going to visualize the archetype itself, and then we're going to see complexes, and these two concepts will overlay perfectly. That domain, it's perfect to throw any type of ingredient into this stew, because it's anything that you've loosely touched base with and or you have knowledge of, right? So yeah, I mean, interdimensional beings as complex as archetypes, as shards of the person themselves, the dreamer themselves, coexisting in a level of autonomy that operate to their own standard, and yet they're all there for the process of individuation to make that person a whole person and then experience self, right? Probably because of a trauma that was tandem to what happened to Laura Palmer, whether or not that be the dreamer. And those ideas are perfect. The idea of unification, the idea of self, the idea of individuation. If you lay those ideas right over the top of one another, I think that there's something to be said for that. I think that this particular scene, it was interesting Joel started there, because I think that this scene itself owes itself more than anything else to a referential nature of media. But I don't think that it's a commentary on media per se, or it can be a commentary on media if you want to go down that road. But it has a narrative purpose. It reads like a dreamer who's uploading characters from various programs, various television shows, who are there to give their catchphrases, right? So it's interesting that, when we see the giant, whom we're not aware is the giant, but when we see the giant, he's hot off the heels of actually being the giant on the show St. Elsewhere just a year before, right? His character is titled The Giant on that show. And it makes you wonder if what you're seeing is the face of archetypes. In that case, it could be the wise old man archetype, the Jungian archetype. If you're seeing the face of an archetype who's come to dispense important information to get you through this personal conscious drama that you're having and on to what you should be doing, which is consolidating all of these various aspects of yourself so that you can finally face what you need to face. And that's kind of the final boss of yourself, right? Who is you?
It's interesting too that it kind of, you mentioned that, and with Carol Stroiken just playing the giant, the particular casting of like Hank Warden,
Absolutely.
and the whole thing is, I think, I just learned recently from Joel, is a riff on a bit that Mark Frost had written for Hill Street Blues a few years ago, with this guy, this weird waiter who keeps intruding on a scene in a hotel room.
And what's strange
Wow.
about it is he's there to perform his famous catchphrase, right? And really to portray the character that Hank plays in everything. Like if you catch his episode of Night Gallery, he's a guy who's waiting in the hell waiting room, who is not really listening to what the other person is trying to tell him. He's having his own conversation in his own world, and then he says, "Thank you kindly," which is his big catchphrase.
Yeah.
Right? That's Hank. You asked me just the other day, we were doing a little impromptu show, Anthony, about whether, is there something to do with the waiting room and the waiter? And I said, I think it has more to do with servitude. But on further reflection, I think it has more to do with the fact that that's a cameo by Hank Warden. Not on this show, in this person's imagination. They have cast that person to be an archetypal representation of something happening inside of them, right? In this case, possibly patience, right? Maybe servitude itself,
just
to say.
So just to be clear, your take on this scene, the first scene from season 2, is that this is taking place inside the mental arena of some sort, the subconscious, the imagination, the dream world, maybe, of
to be
somebody
clear,
else, right?
My take on the entire show, everything you've ever seen, every scene up to and including the intros and outros, are happening in a person's imagination. Well, what's more fair to say is it's happening in a person's personal unconscious, right? And it's a battle of individuation to get over trauma. Yes, that's
All right.
that's my take.
Can I jump in with a question?
Yeah, please.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I've listened to some of you guys' conversations before, and I hope I'm not mixing this up with other conversations you've had or something, but is this sort of building off of Tim Kreider's theory a bit of the Cooper as the dreamer, or is it more with Laura in mind?
Actually, it's neither one.
Or somebody who more resembles Laura, let's say.
Yeah, just to be a massive contrarian, I went with Carrie Page. No, I can't put a narrative reason to Carrie Page without going, well, that must be the closer iteration of that girl. This world that feels more real must actually be real. I don't think that we're actually in the real world per se, but I think we're looking at what her real life looks closer to. And so the way that I read it is the best purpose for a Carrie Page, who doesn't have a memory of the things that happened in Twin Peaks because she suppressed the creation of this personal unconscious drama because it would bring up what happened to her if she didn't suppress it. That seems to be my reading on it, right? And I think that you could look at it all the way through. And I think that the personal unconscious was very much on Frost's mind at the beginning of the lore. And I think that's why we experience media-esque things in it, right? But so, yeah, we're with Carrie Page until that theory goes all kinds of bad. Now it goes.
That actually makes me think of another conversation Anthony had recently with John Thorne, because at least structurally, Carrie Page is like a very Diane Selwyn type figure.
Yes.
Pops up
Absolutely.
at the end as like, maybe this is. So yeah, no, that's an interesting thought.
It's almost like, when Thorne and I discussed the fact that it's a perfect, that film perfectly sort of, it gives you a key to how to view a lot of Lynch's media. If in fact if you subscribe to the idea that Lynch, his lifelong obsession has been the variations of cognitive fugue, showing you from inside, outside, if that's what he's doing, if that's his lifelong obsession artistically, then I think that movie could lay over the top and sort of show you how to watch the other films, Twin Peaks included.
I noticed that the beginning, before the episode starts, we get the sort of "Who Shot JR" thing, which is an obvious like TV reference.
You said it.
We also get the title of the episode, which is "May the Force be with you," or is it "May the Giant be with you"? So I mean, those are just two like kind of overt other references. And I was wondering what Joel or Andrew thought about like the plethora of like references to different pop culture stuff. If I don't know if you think that's more than coincidence, if you think there's intention there,
Yeah.
etc.
I mean, I definitely think there's intention there. I mean, like nowadays, when we talk about like meta stuff, not to necessarily make a criticism, but it's gotten so on the nose that we'll think of like Community or something. But the extent to which Twin Peaks, is a commentary on other media, even up through, I mean, like the original series seems like comments on so much of the TV at the time, Dynasty, Dallas, the Mod Squad, and having Peggy Lipton and I can't remember the actor. The guy who plays Roger Hardy is in it. They were both in the Mod Squad, and they share a scene together. And then season 3 really seems to comment on like prestige television. So I'd say there's definitely something very intentional in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
With an objective, maybe, or just any idea what the intention might be?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, especially I get the sense from Mark to like, I don't know, almost like one up it,
Yeah, I think he has a quote like that directly. If I
Like
remember
you ain't
right,
seen nothing yet, or something, right?
I think the wild card to me is Lynch again, because it's like he he's a little hard to read in terms of his media intake, because for the most part he gives a sense, and I think confirms this in a lot of interviews and stuff, that he's not really a big
Right.
certainly not a huge film watcher, and maybe a little more so TV in recent years. I think at the time of Twin Peaks, hardly at all. But then he'll pop out here and there with references that are very pronounced, both in terms of like he'll say it, he talks about Wizard of Oz, he talks about Vertigo, he talks about Sunset Boulevard, but then every now and then he'll pop out with something. I mean, again, even watching these weather reports from the past few years, these are more song references, but he'll start popping in like, oh, this piece of music. You're like, oh, that's interesting. I've never heard him talk about that. But of course, he's taking stuff in. So I think it's a little bit of a mystery to me what his relationship to other media is, in a way that it's not quite with Frost. Like my default tends to be that he's not so much interested in directly referencing other things, but then he'll pop up with something that is very much that. So I don't want to be categorical about it, I guess.
Yeah. And I want to ask you guys, is this like a real thing that's happening? Cooper, at the start of season 2, he wakes up on the floor, a waiter comes in, they have a kind of an unusual exchange, to say the least. And then this giant sort of appears sort of out of thin air. They have an exchange. The giant takes an artifact off of his hand, leaves. Cooper later looks at his hand and sees that his ring is not there. So some people say, yes, this is happening. Maybe there's some interdimensionality to it, and then other people will say this is, happening in somebody else's psyche or whatnot. I guess for each of you, to what extent do you think this is like rather straightforward or literal, or at least is happening like within the world of the story? Andrew or Joel or Tommy?
It's interesting you would mention it, because like to me this scene almost represents like a cross, like it's almost maybe the most important scene in the show. It's like a crossing of the Rubicon for Twin Peaks, like narratively and stylistically. And part of what makes it so fascinating to me is just how gradually Lynch kind of on-ramps us into it. Like even going so far back as to say, like, if the opening credits of Twin Peaks is like a new day starting, oh, there's a bird in the morning, the Packard sawmill's starting up. This one makes a special choice to hold the credits until nightfall and start to establish this very uncanny tone, which then leads right from the darkness of the river into the darkness of the establishing shot, where the camera subtly shakes. So you're already hit with this unease. And then you get hit with this scene, which is unlike anything we've really seen before, really even the Red Room scene, but comes to define so much of what we think of when we think of Twin Peaks. I mean, a lot of it comes back to this scene. And I think that that the ambiguity is the point. Like this is the first time that we've seen anybody from the lodge in a context where the person wasn't literally asleep. But I think it's very purposeful that it's a man who's in a very fraught state. He's been shot, he's in pain, he could be delirious. I think the subtle on-ramping there is a key part of it. Like the ambiguity of whether or not it's actually happening is key to the scene. So like to me, I mean, I do believe that it's happening, but I believe that again, that ambiguity is important to reading the scene. Yeah.
Do you think it's happening, but it's happening through a particular point of view, or like
Well,
are we supposed to get Cooper's experience in the scene, or maybe some onlooker? I don't know.
I mean, I guess I would say that it's Cooper's, but also it does seem to be the moment in which the spirit world begins to objectively intrude upon Twin Peaks, right? No longer through like Sarah Palmer or Leland's dream. You know, I mean, if you read the show as objective at all, you know, this is where that begins, and it's still, you know, it's still like I say, this kind of subtle on ramping for you to embrace this new, more spiritually driven narrative and this new kind of heterogeneous mix of the uncanny and the humorous and the creepy all at once, which then later leads us toward like, you know, Mike just being Mike, you know what I mean, in the Great Northern and stuff. That's way more overt, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Joel, is this a straightforward scene?
I mean,
I've had people tell me, I don't know what you're talking about. The scene is is basically as straightforward as it gets.
yeah, I think if you draw this scene into question, you basically have to come up with some broader theory that also calls into question, you know, like Ed and Cooper sitting in the hospital and talking, or
Sure.
the guy saying, this is a great piece of pie, or whatever he says. It's like, in other words, I think it's on the same level of reality as everything else in the episode. Not the same level of, obviously it's in some other realm, but in terms of if this is something, like it's not a dream, put it that way. Within the world that we're told to accept throughout this episode, this is something that's really happening. And I think, you know, having him see that the ring is missing and having the giant pop up again at the end and having him voice the idea that, oh, this was just a vision I had, and then sort of contradict it, obviously. And I would assume that's probably a lot of Frost doing. They want to make sure we know, hey, this isn't the Red Room dream. This is something different.
Yeah,
Hey, I'm barging in.
please do. Anytime.
Hi, men.
Hello.
Hi.
I love that background.
Isn't it great? It's the spot, the Salish.
Okay, I was gonna say
Yeah.
it looks like the Great Northern.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, what background
Oh, that's
where do
funny.
I really want to be? I found a picture of the spa.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I am still technically working, you guys, so
Okay.
I'm gonna maybe be looking off at other things, but I'm here.
Yeah, we won't address you for with any at-length questions, but
That's okay.
how about just a quick one on the topic that we're on? Do you think the scene in question is like really happening, like within the world of the story?
So we're talking specifically about when the giant comes to see Cooper when he's on the floor.
Yeah, when the waiter and then the giant come in. Like,
So, okay, and so so is the question like, could it be happening inside Cooper's head?
Or anybody's
Cooper
head
or
for that.
somebody's,
Or
yeah,
somebody,
or
Boy, I haven't actually thought of that. I take everything so literally, just in general. So I just, I mean, I, it always seems to me like the lodge spirits, the denizens, they cross over at different times throughout the show. And for me, I've always felt like it's them permeating some wall or whatever it is. So if that's really what I think, then I would say it's it's happening. I mean, that Cooper's actually having this communication with this spirit. That's how it feels to me when I see it. Um, Especially because, the waiter keeps saying to him, I know, doesn't he say, I know who you are, or I know about
I've
you,
heard
I've
or
heard
about you.
about you.
I've
Yeah.
heard about you. And he gives him the thumbs up. So he clearly has
Right.
information about Cooper, but it's a really interesting question about whether it's in someone's head. What is the group consensus on that?
We think
I
it's
think we're
in Alf's head. We think
Yeah.
Wait,
we're throwing that out there.
in
Al.
whose head?
Alf's.
Alf,
Alf
you
the
mean
alien.
Oh,
you
I
mean the
thought you
alien?
said
Oh.
an elf. Yeah.
In
Alien
Alf's
life
head.
form.
I could see Alf on Twin Peaks.
There it is. That's a Frost swerve if you've ever heard one, right? We'll go aliens quick.
I mean,
But
for real.
Can I
just
want to throw something
yeah,
in
go
at some
ahead.
point.
Mhm.
Because I don't know where to bring this up, but it occurred to me that this scene is maybe of all the supernatural scenes, and there aren't that many in the original series,
Yeah.
kind of only a handful.
Right.
This is probably the one furthest from Firewalk with Me in the sense that the giant is like the only being that's not in Firewalk with Me. It doesn't really like there's a clue having to do with the Laura investigation. It doesn't really involve Laura in any way. And it's funny because the end of this episode has a scene that is, in some ways the closest to Firewalk with Me, where it's literally the death scene with Bob in the train car or a different version of it. So I don't know. I just find that interesting that this scene, which is the kind of the one that says, okay, the supernatural is real or whatever, but this is like the one that has the least, because the next episode we've got the Tremons and the creamed corn. Those are all in Firewalk with Me. I'm just trying to think. It's like almost
That's
every scene
interesting.
in the show. Maybe the one where he waves his hand about Annie, because that's also the giant and also kind of but that's such a brief moment. Like of the big scenes, certainly of the big scenes that Lynch directed, this seems like the one that is the least connected to Firewalk with Me.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
also, I
And
mean,
in some way,
stylistically, I'm sorry. I was gonna say, like,
you go.
it relies so much as well on, I mean, Lynch does some really, really freaky stuff when he gets into the coverage and angles, but it relies so much on like that more stead, big, wide master shot of the show too,
Yeah,
compared to
good
like the
point.
more bracing Firewalk with Me stuff we'll
Hmm.
see like at the end of the episode.
Yeah, true.
So cool. Great observation.
The giant says to Cooper, never mind where I'm from. The question is like, where have you gone? Or he says
Right.
something like that. And that's interesting because Allison was suggesting that maybe the giant came to him, and the giant is telling Cooper, well, maybe you have come sort of to us or to me in some way, wherever that location would be. It's hard to say. I know some people think that, and maybe David Lynch is one. I'm not 100% sure that there are kind of like multiple realities sort of coexisting, or different levels or veils for a phrase that I think he uses in one of his books. Um, so I don't know. Maybe we're getting like a glimpse of like simultaneous locations, for lack of a better term.
Forgot he
I'm
asks
not really
about
sure.
that. It also makes me think about,
Yeah.
especially since Joel just talked about it, when he says, "Where have you gone?" That, Carl Rod says, "I've gone places," right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, I just did this very deep dive over the last few months on the secret history because I did an episode of Colin's podcast about Doug Milford, and
Oh, that'll be
oh,
interesting.
Joel, it was. I mean, for me, it was like the biggest dork fantasy to like get to just dive deep back into that book because I love the secret history.
I
And
love that episode. That episode is wonderful.
oh, thank you very
Yeah.
much. I appreciate that. And but it just, so I'm so still like swimming in the UFOs of it all,
Yeah.
that it always, that part about where the two creators, where their ideas converge. I mean, they're so different, both of them as people, but um, I don't know. It just makes me think of what, it's either the multiple universes, but also, I mean, Carl Rod's suggestion is that he was actually, I mean, he was abducted according to the story, right?
Hmm.
I don't think there was ever any abduction in the Cooper story, but I don't know, what does the giant mean when he says, what the question is, where have you gone?
You know, what's interesting about that scene is there's a lot of DNA and a lot of axiom building that happens between his relationship to the rest of the nature of the program and then the return, right?
Mm,
Wait,
yeah.
Tommy, his who? Who are you speaking of?
I'm speaking of the giant. When
The giant. Okay.
the question being, with the giant questioning the fabric of the reality that they're in at that point and bringing to attention that possibly that should be your main concern. There's also there not only is there that where he can pluck Cooper from the reality that Cooper's in, wherever that might be, but there's also the understanding that the giant will give pointed clues, or the fireman, if you will give pointed clues, and that's the nature of what he does. So it's strange that we do have that established, and then in some awkward way, Anthony, that goes back to what you were talking about what level do you watch this scene on? How real is this realness, right? And in some very real way, it's maybe the most overt confrontation of duality that you get to that point, and then that will separate whether or not you're okay to view the rest of the experience through the prism of a multitude of ways to see it, right?
For who? For the viewer?
For
Or what?
the viewer, because what's transpiring is that if he's in a different perspective entirely,
Say again,
and there's a
and
multitude of ways to see it. Like, yeah,
he being who?
he being Cooper. If Cooper is going to need to look first and foremost at where he is, then he can be in a multitude of perspectives at the same time. And that's our first confrontation with duality to the show in a very real way. Because back to the point of, up to this point, you've been told, well, possibly these are dreams, these experiences that you're having that are, slightly ethereal. But at that point, you're confronted with duality, right? So the reading where this could possibly be in somebody's subpsyche, that probably emanates from there.
And
Well,
just to welcome Patrick real quick. Hi.
Hi, Pat.
Good
Hello.
to see you again. We were all just like answering one like elementary question, which was like, do you think the events of the scene in question like are real? The scene being like the first scene of season 2.
Yes, real to Cooper. I don't know. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does.
I don't know.
Would you...
I mean, I don't know. That's such a difficult question. I mean, in the world of Twin Peaks, I mean, I do think in whatever timeline this is, yes, I think this, those events are happening. There's things that are said, things that happen. But Cooper is touched the other side. I actually watched this scene earlier, and I, of course, didn't make any notes because that's just not how I operate. But there was a line that the giant says to him that was I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something that made me think that, oh, like they already know that he's been in the lodge, or there's already like things that almost reminded me of things being kind of out of time. So yeah, I'll stick with what I first said. I think it is real to Cooper.
Is he alive?
Sorry.
Sorry. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, part of it too is that, he's wounded pretty badly. And so there's the near death part of it, right? And I every time I watch it, I think about how the giant knows that he's not going to die. Right? I mean, because he keeps talking to him and he's giving him these clues. So it's already presupposed that he will live.
Right.
Right. So I don't know. Yeah, there's so many things going on at the same time.
Well,
it just seems by all indication.
The giant seems to be able to see the past and the present and the future too.
Yes.
So he would have that knowledge theoretically, hypothetically. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like by all indication, it would be synonymous with what a dreamer's capability would be, right? It seems that, especially if you're creating the construct of this scene in your active imagination, you're a participant that is helping to design that scene, then you too know how the narrative can go. You too can know the beginning, middle, and end, right? Which would seem to point, I mean, at least to me, that it would be in the personal unconscious of a dreamer per se, or the active imagination.
I guess hopping off that too. I mean, real to Cooper, I think I'm also meaning it could be imagination. It could be when he's dead for 30 seconds, because who knows how long, maybe his heart stopped beating for a certain amount of time. Maybe that's when this is happening. And I mean, he does wake up at some point, because then he has his recording to Diane, assuming that's also, I think
But
it is, because
at some
then
point,
the
though,
crew shows up.
the giant takes his ring. So there's
Yeah.
some crossover, right, that happens. It's not just illusion or delusion or whatever you would call it. There is some kind of a connection. I mean,
Well, and the
on its
waiter hangs
face.
up the phone.
Oh, yeah,
that
and the
was
waiter
another
hangs
thing
up
that struck me pretty good. I was like, well,
Yeah,
someone had to hang up. Someone had to hang up this phone.
right.
That makes me think of a couple. So I said there was like no, this is like the least connected to Firewalk with me, but I can think of at least, I guess, a couple ways that it links up. One is the ring, the fact that he, and to me, I know it kind of takes on a different valence in the Return. The most interesting reading of the Owl Cave ring to me and Firewalk with me is that it has to do with a kind of knowledge as power with Teresa, with Laura, with Leland, what they're kind of, and the fact that it's directly connected to her murder and to Laura's realization that her father is the murderer and her father's her abuser and all of that. So I kind of like the fact that in this episode, even obviously it's a different ring, but that the ring is taken as a kind of token of knowledge. Like, I'll give this back to you. I think he says,
Yeah.
I'll give this to you when you know my clues are true, or something like that.
Right.
And then on just a humorous note, it just occurred to me, I think for the first time when you're talking about the phone being hung up, there's like there's a direct play on words of like phone ringing and ring and Firewalk with me. And maybe that's
Right.
going on here too, where he hangs up the phone, it stops ringing, and then the giant takes his ring.
Anthony, I think what's super interesting about your question, Anthony, is that like it really speaks to whether or not you feel a personal you feel personally against the idea of characters losing their autonomy because they're in the imagination of someone else. Some people are very opposed to that. They feel like it's a waste of time to invest in anything, right? If your show ends as Saint Elsewhere did, they're very mad at this implication that they wasted their time. But to the Jungian feels that the archetypes inside of you all have their own autonomy. So the answer to the question is that it's both real and it's not. It is the duality. If you read it that way, it can totally be that way, and both of those things can be true. And to the Jungian, there's absolutely no problem with that, which I'm not. It sounds like I'm taking memberships for the Jungians. I'm not. They're not giving me a kickback or nothing.
Something interesting that goes back to what Alison was saying, like the giant knows that Cooper is not going to die, so he's giving him clues, which suggests that he knows the future, right? Which also suggests kind of an interiority to Cooper's personal journey. Because I mean, at this point, we might tend to think of it as maybe just a kind of a slightly weird whodunit, but this scene, like, it doesn't matter, like the giant says, right? It matters where you've been, right? Like, you are now at the point of your journey where I can appear to you. You are primed for this next step into this spiritual evolution, right? And so the fact that he knows where it's going, the way that ties back into the idea of Cooper's development as a character and how we interpret the way his journey, continues throughout the show is just, kind of an interesting thought, to kind of, because I mean, obviously we talk a lot about the internal journey of Laura Palmer, but it's interesting to consider just how important Cooper's is as well.
Do you think do you think Cooper has like a certain spiritual or consciousness development that allows him to make this connection to people like the giant, and maybe like, or do you think it's just that he's half dead or something, or maybe a combination of the two?
I mean, yeah, it might be a combination of the two, but I think that's so interesting because obviously he has this naivete, this whimsy, this openness that, I mean, when you think about it, it increases and increases and increases until he is aware, you could almost argue, of like the levers of creation itself when you start to think about parts like 17 and 18 of season 3, you know, and like, and then like I guess the ambiguity or the ambivalence of how he uses that knowledge is really fascinating to consider, you know.
But
I
you
guess
would say he's a more developed individual than most people or most other characters.
Oh
Or
yeah, for sure.
yeah, there might be something tapped in. But I think it's also interesting to think about too that the giant's relationship with him continues through the years, right? I mean, he sees him again in season 3. So there's also that connection too. And the giant is often telling him where he is. Right? I mean, right? He's gone. Where is he gone? And then in season 3, what is it? He says to him, "You're far away." Is that what he says to him? You are far away. I don't
You
know.
are far away.
Yeah. But I like to think that Cooper has sort of a tapped in thing, even though I will say, just because we're having this conversation right now, it's always bothered me that he mocked the log. Like that just never made sense to me. When she said, you know, he's going to talk to the log, and then he kind of just jokes about the log. But I don't know. That always seemed very anti-Cooper to me. Just I don't know. It was an odd choice at the time.
Joel might have an answer. Is that something that David Lynch didn't like? Is this correct? And he kind of steered Cooper in a more mystic direction.
Tell us, Joel.
it's funny, I was looking at Joel too
Oh,
as Allison was talking because I was primed for him to jump in
yeah.
with a
Maybe
response. But
he's off the
since I'm
grid.
sorry, I'm chomping on my French fries. Um, Patrick once pointed out, and I believe he's forgotten,
Probably.
that Cooper signs his tab and leaves a tip with a pen
Yeah.
that has not been opened up.
Oh,
I had forgotten I said that, but I actually listened to that like
that's
20
so
minutes ago.
interesting. That's so
That's funny,
interesting.
man. And also like
Yeah.
you think that's the actual tab that the waiter's giving him like for the milk, or do you think he's like wonder if he's signing something else or like signing something away? I'm just
Right.
kidding, but I was trying to zoom in to see what was written on the on like the waiter's tab, but I couldn't see it. But yeah, that was an interesting observation, Patrick.
That
Yeah,
was
well,
a
I was
good
just
one.
looking at it. You don't see anything come out, and you can tell that the pin's not. I mean, unless he's really pressed in, but he's not. The way he's sort of just loosely moving the pen across the paper. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, it's like
there's nothing
pantomiming it,
happening.
sort of.
Yeah, he's just like, yeah, I
It's
don't care.
perfunctory. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, well, even in the end of season 3 when he's in the restaurant, I mean, it's always bugged me that there's no coffee in the coffee cup. There's no coffee
Mm.
in the cup, right? I mean, it's hard to imagine that that's a continuity error, right? It seems very deliberate, but why?
Yeah.
Yeah, the pen is similar to that. The
Right.
I thought that item was worth lingering on, the like the check, the waiter's pad and the pen. But are there any other items in this scene
You know
that
what?
that jump out to anybody?
When we first enter into the room and we see him on the floor, we're watching the scene the night before last. My wife yells out, "Look, it's a sitting duck," and she's making reference to the duck that's on the floor. And then there's Cooper, right? And so with these further illusions and obsessions with ducks that permeate all throughout the show, right? It was just it was an amazing observation of hers where she says, "Look, it's a sitting duck."
Yeah,
That's a good one.
I have some others that I prepared in advance. I'm not sure if are you guys able to see any of these?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So we got the matching bow ties, Cooper's blood-stained shirt that creates like a spooky face. That's probably coincidence. The letter from Audrey, the tape recorder, the phone. There's an outlet on the wall next to a prone Cooper body, just like in the return.
Mm.
Probably coincidence, but
Mm.
my friend Joseph pointed that out to me. The way the giant is photographed with that lamp. And then if this is in a different scene a little bit later, like that golden ball that he sends. Oh, and then of course the ring. Just randomly asking, do any of these items do anything for anybody?
I mean, I get it. Sorry, I'm back, but I get a kick out of the wall outlet there, obviously in relation to season 3,
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
and his position on the floor actually next to the
Yeah.
wall outlet.
Yeah,
So
similar.
good catch there.
For sure.
Another thing, and I feel like this might be something I read somewhere else. Like I don't know that this was something I thought of, but there's like almost like a little bit of Masonic imagery there with like the waiter. He has like the apron and then also like the bow tie kind of
Hmm.
done up shirt and something. So I think I feel like that's something somebody else caught and I've now internalized.
But it's
Mm.
great.
Well, in the connection to obviously the bow tie with him and the giant, I think that's on purpose. And obviously in the finale, they, underscore that by season 2 finale.
Hmm.
But
It's
Well,
interesting
that's when
too.
that's what. Yeah. So
I
sorry.
was
Go
just about
ahead.
to
I
say,
was just gonna
like,
say that's when they say one and the same. Yeah.
and it's just funny that he would point out Masonic, sort of Masonic influence there, because of course, what do you do? You go to the Masonic lodge, so it's fascinating that like Hank Warden comes in, he's wearing like the apron, and then we get into the concept of lodges later on. That's just fascinating. And it's funny to me because I've actually been in the Masonic Lodge for 15 years and never noticed that until right now, to this today.
That's great. It's so great to have
Yeah.
new epiphanies. It never ends.
Yeah, that really brings your comment to life even more so. Why do they look the same or similar, and then of course later they say one and the same, whatever that might mean. But what do you guys think? Like, they don't have the precisely exact same outfit. Like the giant shirt is a little darker or bluer. He doesn't have an apron. But generally speaking, they have the same appearance, similar appearance. What's up with that? Is it just this is a show of similar things with a lot of similar things, or I
I
don't know,
think
any theories?
I think it starts with Lynch just liking the kind of echo and the rhyming of it. And then I would suspect, well, again, this is, I think I don't think the waiter is in the script for the finale. I'm not even sure the giant is, come to think of it. So
Hmm.
that line is also added by Lynch. So it's maybe something he decided he wanted to, in the midst of all of the pulling, being obscure.
What's the
He wanted to
line you're
clarify
talking?
something
What's the line, Joel, you're talking about?
when he says one and the same.
Oh.
Well, the little man actually says it, which, funnily enough, other people have decided it means that the man
Right.
from another place and the giant are the same.
Uh,
I think the
Right.
most common interpretation is that the waiter and him are the same.
uh-huh.
And yeah, it is kind of funny that Lynch is the one who apparently added that explanation, if you want to call it that, because
Hmm.
oftentimes he's averse to that.
See, my interpretation was that the giant inhabits the waiter in the same way that Bob inhabits Leland.
Yeah, I think
Sure.
that's what they're implying.
Sure. But then there's also that the two of them are the media representations for things that they have been previous. And they are both the same in that aspect, right? Because if the giant is reprising, I mean, he's loosely reprising a role called the giant from St. Elsewhere, but if he's reprising that role to a degree, then you've also got Hank Warden, who's reprising roles that he is, very synonymous with and pretty much does in every role that he does. They're one and the same. They're a representation of media or things that you would pull to your personal unconscious, right? Because those are the types of things that we do pull to our personal unconscious, or dream logic or fugues or dissonance or however you want to say it.
Going
And
quick before I lose the
yeah,
thought about Bob, if he's like inhabited, let's say the waiter's inhabited. The only time we do see the waiter is when the giant is there. However, isn't it in the next episode after this where Albert at least references this waiter? But we don't ever see that scene, but he calls
Right.
him, Señor Droolcup, and so, it makes you think that he's seen this person wandering around or working at
Mhm.
the Great Northern.
But
But
he
on that,
also he shows up, Patrick, doesn't he? He shows up at the
I mean,
at
he
the
shows up.
At the
He shows
Roadhouse,
up
at the
yeah,
at the
Roadhouse.
Roadhouse, yeah, and
yeah,
that's
with
right
Major
after the.
Briggs.
But that's also
Right.
right, and but the giant is on there for all those
Mm.
occasions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So that means
because
that Briggs, everybody sees him. It's not just
Yeah.
right,
Cooper.
yeah. But Briggs, at least we know. I mean, and I guess maybe Albert to a point. Like just these people that do see him and are with him are I don't want to. I guess like Coop, they've
They're tuned
at
in.
least tuned in. They're tuned in. That's the best way to describe it. And I
Oh,
guess just
they're
before I lose
they're
the
blue
other,
rosy. Yeah.
right, the last thought was just I wanted to bring up because I just think it's hilarious. And I don't even remember where I first read it or whatever, but the Senior Droolcup thing, uh, and him being associated with the giant, with Senorita Dido being associated with the fireman. I liked Senorita Dido and Senor Droolcup, one and the same. Anyway,
Yeah, there you go.
You
They
know, I
need
mean,
an El Torito.
I think in
yeah,
the
right.
narrative of the
And
show,
Tommy,
in the narrative
just
of
one
the show,
second.
it's real.
I want to just say hi to John real quick,
Hi,
and because
John.
John,
Hi, John.
we need to
Hello.
make sure that the pillow is in the frame, and it
The bonsai.
because the famous
incredible.
bonsai pillow.
Right.
And yeah, Tommy, I'm sorry to cut you off, but John, any thoughts on the waiter and the giant having a very similar appearance, amongst other things?
I really don't know. I know just from a casting standpoint that, they just happened to be who they were, but um, the balance is nice. It's just how intentional was it for them to be the same? And I don't know. I don't know. I was liking the vibe in here though when I came in. I feel like I'm almost caught up.
There goes the bonsai.
Okay, cool.
Is John's microphone tremendously low?
Yeah, John, your level's low, really low.
Yeah, it's just a little tiny bit soft.
Yeah.
Give us one of those "Hello Cleveland's" and
No, yell bonsai and
And if it remains so, then all that does is draw your listeners in like this.
Yes,
And,
right.
that's it.
Everybody leans forward.
That's what I do in the classroom. That's pretty much my MO. But Tommy, do you remember your thought, or was it a quick one?
oh, Jungian duality, blah blah.
Yeah.
That's pretty much my whole shtick.
Actually,
So-
I had a thought when Tom was talking about all the TV influences on the giant and the waiter and their past histories and where that comes from.
Mhm.
I don't think we never see Cooper watch TV until the Gordon Cole moment in season 3, right? That's kind of interesting. I don't know, because he mentioned something about TV at the Great Northern. I think he's like, oh, they've something, when he's speaking to
right.
Diane.
He won't
And
have
then
time
it's
to
like-
watch what he says.
Right, yeah, and he doesn't until he's sitting having his piece of cake and he hears Gordon Cole's name. That's kind of interesting. I don't know.
Mhm.
At
Well,
least
it's
to me.
interesting that the entire, I mean, look, the entire reason behind that, the scene occurring is because of a media trope itself, right? Like you guys have discussed it already. Yes, of
Oh,
course,
yeah.
it's the who shot JR trope, but to a larger degree, it's every single thing that's happening is in some way, shape, or form a media trope. And whereas yes, I mean that can be commentary if you like, but it also has a narrative purpose. If you subscribe to the concept that somebody's envisioning this and they're drawing in all of these various influences, things that they've seen, things that they could have seen, especially at the time, pretty soon. So
I think that's fun to think about. But Tommy, I gotta ask you, like, if this is sort of a dreamy type space,
Sure.
subconsciously or asleep wise, um, why is so much of the story, there's a lot of weirdness, but why is so much of it like rather linear, kind of straightforward, whereas dreams are way wackier than the stuff
Well,
that
I guess you
happens
pick
in
your
Twin
poison,
Peaks.
right? Like it depends on how long you want to look. If time has no true fabric, as we're told it doesn't, right? Then you sort of got to pick your poison. How long did seasons 1 and 2 last in the dream state? 2 seconds. And by the time you get to 3, is 3 linear, right? Is 3 more ethereal and more dreamlike for you? In your own dream, are you hanging on for, you know exactly what's happening within the first scene of your dream, and then suddenly everything just, becomes these strange sets of circumstances? I guess it depends on how long you consider that this is happening in a fugue state, right? The obsession about telling you that the chronology may not be exactly what you're seeing could be a reflection of the idea that this stuff is happening way faster than we're thinking. So, but I do think that there's a case to be made, Anthony, that there are things that happen in it that are extremely dreamy. I mean, let's not forget things like spotlights hitting people while they're dying. Why is a spotlight hitting? Why is this all of a sudden become a TV? It's a TV show within a show. All of a sudden, you're seeing a show speak about characters. You saw a guy play with the band, and the band's not there, right? James is performing with the band that doesn't exist. There are several instances where the dream logic kicks up very high, but it's all media related when it happens to some degree. I killed the room. Oh no.
Yeah, I'm waiting for.
No, it's a lot. It's a
Oh,
lot
no.
to chew on.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking, does Cooper even have a TV in his room? That's where my mind's at.
It's off screen, yeah.
Because I was curious if he just left Invitation to Love on, and maybe there was an episode we missed where Chet got visited by a giant.
Absolutely. 1,000%.
And I was
Perfect.
thinking about how many moons ago, I lived in a house near the Beverly Center. So it's La Cienega and Wilshire, basically. And my husband and I were watching TV, and then we hear a helicopter overhead, and the news is like, Larry Hagman's liver is being flown to Cedars-Sinai right now. JR was getting a liver transplant, and his liver was being transplanted. Anyway, just a little bit of movie star history.
Amazing.
One thing sorry, you go, Joel.
No, go ahead.
Just something that stuck out to me this time that I had never noticed before, because I watched the scene to prepare for this, and it's just a remarkable bit of like serendipity, is how easy it is to like read this scene is one where like Hank Warden's character's intellect is like intertwined with the giant, which at the time I think they were still going with this idea that like Leland enters a fugue state, and by Firewalk with Me it was more like Leland's intellect was kind of influenced by Bob, right? Intermingled and tainted. And it's just fascinating how like Hank Warden just kind of keeps accidentally doing things that you could see the giant wanting him to do. I mean, because obviously if you hang up on the police and it's a federal agent, they're going to send somebody. So you are going to receive medical attention and assistance, right? And he leaves and he comes back, because the giant needs to be there. The giant needs to talk with him. And it's just fascinating, these little ways in which it almost looks like you could read his actions as being driven by the giant's influence.
Yeah, I kind of almost see it like where there's a transition state between the things. It's like you start out with the waiter coming in, and then like, it gets just weirder and weirder and more surreal to kind of set the table for the giant. But then like even toward the end of the giant's thing, it almost transitions back into regular stuff. Like he will eventually say like, there's a clue in Leo's house, and then you require medical attention. So it's almost like they both set the table for the next thing, or the next state that you come across.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's like a transition in, and then like a sort of soft landing out. Why does the
So
Giants? No, if somebody wants to jump in, that's fine. But I'm still going to ask. Why does he say? What the Giant says? We. Hang on one second. He says, "We want to help you." And then
hmm,
Cooper's like, "Who's we?" And he won't answer that, of course. But is this like
yeah, that's
this might have
interesting.
been something John said once, but maybe not. But is we like we the Giants or like we who?
Well, it's funny because that's like a positive plural. And then in episode 16, there's like a negative plural where Leland's like, they made me do this and that and all that. It seems like it was almost, I mean, maybe this isn't that interesting of an answer, but it seems like it was kind of a placeholder for whenever they figured out the spirits, which I think was something they always were kind of punting on, at least until they started to kind of develop the lodge mythology and all of that. But it feels like they wanted to just be like, let's put a pin in this. There's other forces out there. This is part of something bigger, but behind the scenes, I don't think they'd quite figured it out yet what that would be.
Sure,
Yeah.
because referring to we at the time, you're going to go on later to see the Giant in the Red Room. So the implication of that we and what it probably meant, I mean, aside from the retroactivating it, as Joel is speaking to, aside from the retroactivating it later, it's we. It's exactly what you think it means.
Yeah, but it's a little more than that. Like, because I think like didn't the one arm or didn't Mike like they mention the Giant and it's like he is known to us or something like
Oh
that.
yeah, he says it
And
too.
also
Yeah.
in Secret History of Twin Peaks, we've got Jacoby's trip with the Metahune or whoever it was, and like he's talking about all these like reptilian giant shaped kind of creatures like in a plural, so like there's all of that. But yeah, I mean what Joel said about punting because they
And doesn't
don't want
Richard
to have to
Nixon
do
say
it.
that too? Doesn't Richard Nixon say like they've been here a long time or
Yeah.
something?
Yes.
Or Dougie, it's one of
Yeah.
them.
I think Milford says it.
Okay, yeah,
But I
they've been
also think,
here
I mean,
forever.
yeah, the Giant is kind of the leader of the band, so I think the we is
The band.
collective of the group of, I mean, there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
Well, it's like
Right?
whenever we see the like objects that, I'm going to like part eight, but when when the alarm goes off and he comes behind the thimble shaped
Yeah.
object, everybody has a different interpretation for what it is, but Philip Jeffries is in a similar thing in The Return.
Mhm.
And there's one on top of uh
Right. The outer
with not
space.
with Nido, yeah, with
Yeah.
Briggs.
Mhm.
So like
Mhm.
maybe the team it's Jeffries, Briggs, the Giant, whoever, and because you see a room full of
Mhm.
these machines. Who else? Who else is in one of these, or I don't know who's attached to one of these.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
That's where my
heavily
mind goes.
powered when you think of that gigantic room, and that whole room needs to be activated, it seems, for
Yeah.
whatever's
So
coming next. So
let me.
maybe there's
Oh, sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
No, keep going. Finish your thought. Sorry.
I was just gonna say maybe there's some sort of battle going on, a team versus team thing, or
Yeah.
I was gonna take it in a direction from here, but Joel, go ahead.
So I was gonna say I'm gonna hop off in a minute, but I
Mhm.
was on a bathroom break. My headphones were unplugged, so I could hear everyone asking me something, and I was like, "Oh crap! Of course, this is
Of
when it
course.
happens." So I want to address that, and then maybe that'll leave people with something to discuss too, which is
Yeah.
you're talking about the log lady
Yes,
and
Joel,
this
tell
this
us.
question of so in one of the videos that kind of talks about that, where when you look at like who wrote what script, the sense I got from it was that in Frost's script, certainly like his solo, but also that one where it's like Lynch and Frost wrote it together, but maybe that was a Frost element, putting that out there, that Cooper is like a little more down to earth, a little more shaky in some ways. And Lynch, interestingly, because Lynch certainly does have a interest in flawed characters, but in his scripts, or I guess not his scripts so much, but when he's directing, let's say, because usually he's co-writing, but when he's like directing and he can kind of add things in himself, it's usually emphasizing Cooper as this kind of uh almost like savant, like this very uniquely talented individual who is deeply in touch with the unknown. And then I kind of get the sense as Twin Peaks goes on toward the end, especially, that Lynch is almost forced to grapple with what Frost has brought to the character. So I guess I would be curious. This is a scene that apparently Lynch called up Frost to suggest. Said there's a giant in Cooper's room, and Frost said, "Okay, if you say so." And he wrote, and then he's given a story credit on the episode. Frost wrote the episode more or less solo. Lynch directed it. I'm gonna log off and only find out when I listen to the completed episode. So I think that'll be kind of fun. But I want to leave it with people, in addition to whatever Anthony is about to ask as well. Like, what do you think this scene does for the sense of Cooper as a character overall, but particularly like that question of like, is he somebody who's on track? Is he somebody who is lost? Like, where does it fit into that paradigm? So with that, I will say goodbye for now, and I look forward to hearing further thoughts of the discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel.
Bye,
All right.
Joel.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Joel.
Hey,
Good night. Thanks for making the time.
It was great.
See ya.
what we ought to do is like 45 minutes on Gilligan's Island so that when he comes back, he's like, what the hell is this? What happened? Right?
Yeah. John, the reason that we're talking about the log was just because the question was, I think Anthony asked it about Cooper's spiritual connection, and I just kind of hearkened back to that scene where it seemed so out of Cooper to me, that one time where he's asked to communicate with the log and he
Yeah, he
acts
looks
like she's a
askance at
nut.
it. Yeah.
Right. Which to me felt so contrary to what I knew of his character.
hmm
Yeah.
Well, there's a
So,
sense of FBI trope that's happening instantaneously with that character, I feel, right? And that will start to dissipate, especially as Lynch starts to assume control, because Lynch has been in, several noted places talking about how the tone, even the verbiage of Cooper is him, that Cooper says things he says, right? I think that becomes more commanding as it goes on, even with his disinvolvement later. I think that it's he's more protective of that. But I have a very different take on what Cooper is as an entity himself, as an archetype, as a complex that's happening, right? But I think that originally, I think that they're operating in this domain of almost buddy cop / what, the one-liners, the funny axioms that you would see in those original medias. I think that a lot of that's occurring originally with Cooper.
I could see that. I mean, Frost and McLaughlin and Lynch all kind of like Cooper's all three of them in a lot of ways. Like I know that Lynch talks a lot, but he speaks in a lot of Lynchisms, but he also speaks in Frost isms too. Like we just don't really get to see him because Frost doesn't kind of like have a shtick online or anything that we can kind of like attach to. But like him getting mad at the Norwegians, things like that. Like in season 1 especially, like there's a lot more Frost touches because he was running the ship for most of it. So like like when Lynch comes in to direct him, like well, you were kind of saying like Joel was kind of saying like he kind of becomes this different kind of Cooper, like specifically when Lynch directs, and like I would definitely say that. But yeah, like Cooper is a composite of those three guys in particular. Like I know yeah, like I'm not exactly sure how much McLaughlin brings to it, because he'll cop to saying like he does a lot of Lynchy things too, especially I think once Gordon Cole comes in. But like it's I don't know, it's he meets all the sensibilities. Like it's not just the one guy. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I'm
think
not
you
sure
can
what that adds
also, I
to.
think you can also see, I mean, I don't know, for me, again, just having spent so much time in the secret history and just diving into
Mhm.
the Frost aspect is when I go, I'm back now rewatching the show because I'm doing it along with a new podcast, the detective and the log
Mhm.
lady. And so I just thought, oh, I'm going to watch again. Any excuse to go back and watch again. But I definitely, every time I do it, I definitely pick up Mark Frost in a lot of
Yeah.
it. More than I think I would have otherwise. I mean, he's always been the same person. He's right. I mean, he's a staunch environmentalist and politically oriented, and he seems very grounded in his opinions. Yeah. So I agree. It feels like the Cooper character is a combination of them, and then but it those I just sometimes I get tripped up in that part where, and I think John, you've talked about this oftentimes in different episodes of your podcast, or sometimes where there's the parts of the show that are just the coincidences that happen, and there's not intention behind it. They're
Yeah.
just things that happen, and but we make things out of them because they fit the story, and then the
Yeah.
other things that are clearly intentional. And
Mhm.
sometimes it feels to me like in season one of episode two is still kind of early in the history of the show, when it was only the eighth episode, something like that. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
The one with the giant. Yeah. Episode
Yeah,
8. So
episode right,
ninth overall.
ninth overall. So maybe it's still kind of in the newness of it as well, where they're still
Mhm.
right figuring out their
Yeah.
collective voices.
Yeah. Like
And they had
Frost
they had
and Lynch
sorry,
want
go
to
ahead.
bring in more of the esoteric, mythological kind of stuff like this. Like the
Hmm.
more supernatural.
Right,
So like yeah, like that wasn't part of it up to this point very much.
right.
But yeah.
But Tommy, I can also totally see all the tropes and stuff. I mean, Mark Frost worked on Hill Street Blues,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
For years
Yeah.
and years and years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
hmm And
Well,
they
but
were all
what's
obsessed with noir.
the
Noir,
most
right.
important thing about when you talk to his philosophy, it's like, well, if if you pursue a life of writing, there's no more telling attribute of you as a human being if you're a writer and a Jungian. Like, to be a Jungian would trump everything else, because that's a deeply embedded philosophy of what story is to you and how you think that it operates in your mind and why. Jungians believe that the story itself is a trait, much like your DNA. It's passed on, right? So your ability to touch base with archetypes, your usage of archetypes, it's crucial. In some way, I mean, it wouldn't be far off to say the guy could be creating something, creating a lore that acts as a representation, a visual representation of the personal unconscious come to life before us,
Mm.
right? Somewhere where that's true, and then Lynch spends the rest of his career diagnosing what it looks like visually when you have cognitive dissonance. Those are almost the same thing,
hmm
right? So the personal unconscious, that's something that would be on Frost's mind. And just as, Jung would suggest in his major works, you pull from media, you pull from the people that you pull from the faces of actors that you've seen, you know, it's everything. You pull from religions and philosophies and music and,
hmm
Yeah. And his command of it is incredible. I mean, in going back through the secret history so many times, I don't know. I just have such an affinity for Mark Frost.
yeah, I want to get this off the ground. We gotta start the Frostian movement.
Yeah,
Nobody ever
we need
says
to.
Frostian, right? Like we gotta
I like it.
get that out there.
It's pretty good.
I like
Enjoy.
it. The Frostians, right?
If you can blame it on an
You guys have
alien,
fun.
but he might be part of the occult,
Right.
Frostian.
Absolutely. 100%.
I, Joel's question had the word function in it, and that is the same word that I was going to use in a one or series of questions. And he was asking like how this scene functions in terms of developing Cooper or maybe changing your relationship with Cooper. And I was going to ask, how does this scene like function in terms of the story as a whole of Twin Peaks, or if anyone prefers, the uh, the really slow pacing in this scene? Like, what do you think is the function of that really slow, quiet pacing?
What I would
To,
say, like in terms of what Joel was saying and what you're saying, and which also dovetails with what Tommy is saying, is I believe that at that point, Cooper was on track. I think the irony is that of Twin Peaks is that like Wyndham Earl throws him off track, right? And
Wait, Andrew, on track for what?
well, I think like a spiritual
Oh, a
evolution.
path. I gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think Wyndham Earl and his shenanigans, especially with regards to Annie Blackburn, throws Cooper off. And I think that dovetails with the way the scene functions in the show, which was a show that was undergoing a rapid but also breathtaking stylistic evolution. And it's just so fascinating how what would have either been unintentionally or subconsciously the Cooper's journey as the man who gets thrown off of his evolution dovetails with the stylistic evolution of the show, which evolves up until about you reveal the killer and then it's thrown off track. So it's just an interesting way in which Twin Peaks as a piece of fiction dovetails with like the meta of its own creation.
that makes sense. Do you think the filmmakers, I don't know what the right word is, Lynch and everybody else, do you think they were making a statement like that, like sort of taking the show back in a way
I mean, it
with
could
this
be,
opening scene?
or it could. Well,
Yeah.
well, I mean, I feel like it almost happened because, like, the show eventually goes off track. But also, what you said there, I do think was Lynch taking back an element of control. Probably, I mean, I think well known, probably to Mark's chagrin at that point a little bit, because
Yeah.
Lynch just doesn't fit with the paradigm of a 22 episode a year TV show.
Yeah, and Lynch came in hot off of that because he was doing the Wild at Heart thing in season one, and he came in late, and like there's all these kudos. He's getting all this credit, and he knows it. And Harley Peyton in oh God, I think it was uh, the Brad Dukes oral history. Um, Peyton basically gave Lynch a lot of credit, saying like, it's like he came in, he knew that he hadn't done the work that he's getting credit for, and he's going to come in extra hard and extra strong and like really do the work right up front. And I mean, we get him directing a double-sized first episode, and then the very next one too. So yeah, like he wanted to make sure that he kind of put it back to where it came from. And I think also the quote, like when they watched the Mark Frost directed episode, like the only comment he says is like, it's a busy night in Twin Peaks, and that was the only thing he said. So yeah, I think he was really recalibrating back to where he kind of felt like it should be.
And there's a lot of like unapologeticness to how this episode goes in that first scene. And I know John, you've tracked like the ratings and that whole thing like as much as anybody has. And that perhaps this was where like a lot of viewers were lost in some way. So was this like a filter? Do you think this possibly was like a filtering mechanism for the audience, even though the network would probably not want that to happen? Or
I don't think
is
he
that
cares
ridiculous?
that much. I really don't think he cares. I think him and Frost had this really funny idea about the slowest waiter in the world, because I guess this gag got used in Hill Street Blues and everything too. And he like I don't know. Lynch just slows things down. It's like I think he could feel the hype in the world too, and it's like it's like everybody loves this. The energy is just like this crazy hot thing with the people paying attention, And I mean, he did the same thing in part one too. You know, it's like like the glass box scene with Sam. Like, you know, it's like just slow it down. You know, it's like
Mm.
let's look at him switching out SD cards. You know, it's like we're gonna watch that shovel box go up the hill in the truck, and we're not even gonna know there's shovels inside it. You know, it's like you gotta have the patience. You gotta have the slow. It's like, okay, I know you're excited. I know you want more, but you know, just calm it down. It's okay.
Yeah,
Do you
it might
think?
not be like that scene might not have been a filter so much as just a very subversive instinct from Link because
Yeah.
he knew how hot it was. Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm. Was this
Interesting.
is this scene a commentary on waiting or patience or
Yeah, I think
not just
so.
that there's a waiter in it, but like,
Yeah.
you
I've
know,
thought about that for that reason.
Yeah.
Yes. He's
yeah,
I
a
mean,
waiter.
also just playing in later to the waiting room. It's just there's a lot of
yeah.
waiting.
There's a lot
There's a
of
lot of
waiting.
waiting.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I like to think about the waiter is like when he's at the Roadhouse. Is that where he goes on his like night off? Is that like his hangout after working the midnight shift, the overnight shift?
Doesn't even
Yeah.
That
change
one time.
But he
clothes.
doesn't change clothes. He's always
Yeah.
in the same outfit.
He goes
Yeah,
straight from work.
totally.
Um, John, in the episode that you did on this
Hmm.
on this scene, this show, whatever, this episode of Twin Peaks, you noticed how much repetition is in this scene in particular and in the episode at large. And I don't know if you remember anything you said during that episode, but there is just endless repetition, and it's interesting.
Yeah.
If it's significant, I'm not sure, but it's interesting for sure. Does that spark any thoughts for anybody? The sheer load of repetition in this scene.
Are you saying like, you know, I've heard about you and I've heard about you like multiple times, like dialogue repeated twice or whatever? Like, yeah. I
Yeah,
think I think that's
actions.
just
Andy on the phone too.
Yep.
yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He kept saying it over and over. You
Hmm.
know, I
Hmm.
did the TM training like 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago. And you know, you get your mantra and then you just repeat the mantra over and over and over and over again. And that's, you know, that's the technique. That's a major part of the technique. And I think about that when you hear a lot of the same things repeated and just repetition in general. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much TM actually really influenced Lynch during Twin Peaks, but I mean, I think it influences everything in his life to some degree.
Yeah. I would say so. Like when he seems to have repeated dialogue twice, like it's either really important or like the heart of the scene. Like whenever it happened, like I'm thinking of even in Fire Walk with Me. That's when I'm
With
still hip
Sam.
deep in the middle of.
Sam, yeah.
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 Oh yeah.
The coffee. Good Morning
The coffee.
Yeah,
America,
like a
right?
good wake me up, Agent
Yeah.
Yeah.
Desmond. Yeah, like yeah, but there's more than that though. Like even the guy with the French girl next to him in Halves, you
Yes.
know, it's like
Yeah.
Oh, right. Right.
the girl getting murdered, you know, it's like yeah, I mean in that case I think it's more of like a repetition in a different dynamic, but like if somebody says something twice or if Cooper echoes the person saying something, like it just seems like maybe it is like related to the mantra or you know if you say it over and over again it like clarifies, it becomes more in focus that way. Like
Hmm.
I think maybe that's what it is. Like it's not necessarily truth or importance, it's that it's it deserves focus for whatever reason.
It
Yeah.
could also be a riff on the nature of time, sort of a schism, you know, a skip, something like that. Now,
Sure.
I'm not implying that this is true, but I really I dig the idea that you went to go learn TM because we have to better understand Twin Peaks. I was just doing this commentary on the barrier of entry to be like a Buffy fan is that you have a remote, right? Like, or the barrier of entry to be like a Cheers fan is that you can watch it on your phone. The barrier of entry to be a Twin Peaks fan is like you have to go study psych,
Right.
right? Like
Yep.
you have to get a library card and maybe a bachelor's. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's actually an interesting thing too, to think about it from that perspective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the show makes people want to read or watch or engage,
Yeah.
listen to things like few things I've ever heard of.
Yeah, better
I
ones.
know that happened to me. Like half my bookshelf behind me is just like stuff that I acquired because I felt compelled to. Not because I wanted to have a pretty picture of it. I felt like I needed to keep getting these things.
Mhm.
It's been a while though.
But even
But
more than that, to investigate the peripheral fan media,
Yeah.
I mean, I have gotten so many hours of entertainment and enjoyment and intrigue and concepts from the people that I'm speaking to right now.
Totally.
Right? Just so like, you guys have entertained me so infinitely,
Love to hear it.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah,
And people who don't understand it just don't get it at all. I went away for a few days, and all I did was read The Secret History of Twin Peaks. And people were like, "What'd you do?" And I was like, "I read The Secret History of Twin
oh my
Peaks."
God, I read it in a different place.
I just, that was all I wanted to do.
We got
Well,
a
I need to.
neighbor who's watching right now, and I think he just finished The Missing Piece, or he's probably watching The Missing Pieces tonight, but that's where he's at, and it's his first time watching. So
Oh,
that's been pretty exciting.
lucky.
Oh, that's so
Yeah.
exciting.
That's
And
been fun.
you've been, yeah, that's awesome. I mean,
He's super
and
into
obviously
it, so
that's very cool. And obviously, you're
yeah.
within this world. You're famous for having a newbie watcher to
That's
talk
true.
to week after week after week. That's
It's my
awesome. I
thing.
wish I had it. I'm going to show you this real quick. We'll cover the name up. This is, you can't see, but this is me trying to get anyone I know to watch the scene that we're discussing tonight. I put it on Facebook. I sent it to friends. I tried to get my 10-year-old daughter Vivian to watch like a little part of it. She's like, "Let me guess, it's Twin Peaks." No thanks.
That's so funny.
And at 9:17 p.m., so like an hour or so into this discussion, I got a text from my brother-in-law, and so I actually got a hit after like trying for a week, and he wrote, "That was pretty odd. Poor guy couldn't get any real help."
Oh.
I thought that was a pretty good observation.
Call the doctor. Did you call the doctor?
Well, I think Cooper makes the mistake of asking like too many questions. As a teacher, I know to try to avoid doing this because he's like, "Can you?" I think he says, "Can you put the milk over on the table?"
Oh, right.
And also, can
Oh,
you call
yeah.
the doctor?
Right.
And the waiter can handle like one request at a time. Like he successfully puts the
Did we
milk
run
away,
back the
but
idea that perhaps how his treatment of the waiter, despite the fact that clearly the waiter could, be quicker about what he's doing and be more helpful, his treatment of the waiter will then dictate whether or not the giant will dispense the information that he gives to him. Right? I've seen that
that's
implied,
interesting.
a multitude of times. And regardless of my reading of the fact that this is happening in, a subpsyche domain and what have you, it's like the show is real. That, what you're touching base with is real, despite that. The narrative is real. So that'll take him on his journey, right? Because if he screams at the guy, "Hey, you hurry the hell up and go get somebody," there's a case to be made. Maybe he won't be helped.
Yeah, that's
Got to
interesting.
call for help.
Call for help.
So one interesting thing that I don't know, like I got on this kick when I was doing this part of the show for my podcast. It's kind of almost like, the land of fairies that you're entering in a way. It's like one of those kind of things. And like, or, like you're transitioning into the land of the weird metaphysical creatures anyway. And what he does, like he doesn't get in until after he signs the gratuity. So it's like he accepts the milk from the
Right.
from the person. So it's almost like the thing where like, don't eat the food or you're stuck there. Like, I don't know. Like
Interesting. That's
it's not
interesting.
exactly like that. And of course he doesn't drink the milk, so I mean maybe that's why he comes back. But
Oh, sorry.
yeah. No, I'm just rambling at this point. I don't know where my off ramp is.
I was just thinking, like, it calls to mind, like what Tommy was just saying, and it calls to mind Martha Nachemson's work on Lynch, like The Passion of David Lynch, and how a lot of times character growth can come through like receptivity and passivity, right? So yeah, maybe like him, being so passive and receptive to the shortcomings of the waiter and his presence there, as opposed to like kind of willfully, asking for, demanding help, which per Nachemson is often a hallmark of a Lynch villain, right? The willfulness. Maybe that's so. Yeah, maybe that's what lets the giant know, he's ready or something. Interesting.
And John, this is not
and
important.
again, a reflection
Please.
on just Hank Gordon, the character that he seems to portray a lot. The character that's he's out of alignment with the people that are speaking to him in most of the roles that he plays, right? So a concoction of the dreamer to recall the actor, Hank Gordon, who plays this character often, who doesn't really pay attention to the other people, but still moves the story forward anyway. Right.
Yeah, I just recently met here in California. I don't know if you have the same, but we have a channel on the cable called Me TV, and it's all nostalgic television. And so we don't watch regular TV all that much, but if we're watching TV, it's going to be on that channel. And they play from like 11 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock at night, Westerns.
Yeah.
And it's it's Bonanza and the Rifleman, and Hank has been on a few of those episodes, right. And every time I see him, I'm like, oh, there's the
I know him.
I've seen him in otherwise, but
that's why I think everybody was.
I've heard about you
too.
Yeah, I've heard about
you. Look at the.
Sorry, John, go ahead.
Oh no, like I think everybody was like feeling like that, like when they were on the set with him too. It's like, dude, you're in all the Westerns.
Right.
This is awesome. Like,
Right.
they were so happy to be on set.
Yeah, Harry Dean Stanton is in a lot of them too. And what's interesting is he's always looked old. Even when he was young, he looked old. Yeah, he's in a lot of the episodes. He's so good. He's such a good actor. Yeah, it's fun to see those old shows. But I think I connect with what you're saying, Tommy, also too. I don't have, my involvement in Twin Peaks from a critical standpoint is really just like pretty much sucking up what everybody else reads and writes and talks about, and then assimilating them into my own thoughts as if I own them myself. I love it. So I have very little on the media side of critique, but I always thought about that scene in The Return where it's Lynch and Dern and Cooper and McLaughlin, and they're all walking together, right, in that sort of dreamy sequence.
Yes.
And the thing I always think of is it's the director and his muses.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Yeah. I cannot wait to get into the dreamer of Twin Peaks is a fan of David Lynch. It could go on forever. I'm
just curious, what's in back of you? Is that your podcast?
Yeah. So this with my non-invasive plug that I'm doing here.
Right.
That is the podcast Dreamer's Diary. This painting right here is made by my wife. It's unfinished.
It's so cool.
She just began to substitute. So she's busy doing things. I'm busy making productions, and she will get back to that. So we have a makeshift thumbnail for right now, but eventually it will be that.
Great.
Nice.
The fractured face of whom we consider to be the dreamer.
Is she a fan?
Oh yeah. So our podcast, it's me and Heather's podcast. We're our Twin Peaks experience is at the hip with one another.
Awesome.
Right? We're fans together. It's our activity together.
Love it.
It's our philosophy together. I don't know how that ended up working out, but there you go. Right?
Take it. Happy accident.
Definitely.
I think that's pretty rare too. I mean, usually one of the spouses is way harder core than the other. I know for many people, myself included,
Myself included.
my wife did a run through with me, and
That was it.
then I became annoying. But she actually brought up maybe watching it again this winter, so we'll see. But
Nice.
yeah, but I could say that Tommy, his first episode is out,
Yeah. Okay. So
and
is that
definitely worth
the
checking out.
and that's the name of the podcast, Tommy?
It's Dreamer's Diary, a Twin Peaks Theory podcast, because I couldn't figure out a way to put more words into the title, but I'll get there. I thought, how many SEO terms do we need? Yeah, and the hook of the podcast is I have a very specific theory. Heather and I have a very specific theory, and we're working it sort of in real time. Hopefully it works out and it all tracks. And if it doesn't, then it will fall apart and go all to hell, and we'll have to start a Frasier podcast instead.
There you go.
There you go.
Hey, goals.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to poke holes in it as much as I can. As I told you, Tommy, like, offline, not just to keep giving it the test.
Yeah.
And I think anybody who watches this discussion, hopefully it downloads okay and can get out there. I think people will be interested in trying to push back with some holes as well.
Yeah,
And
I
I
mean,
think that'll make it more fun.
it definitely operates more in the outer layer, that which you cannot know, more than a lot of other shows will do. And I understand that not a lot of people are comfortable with that. Not a lot of people like that you do that, right? It's not as referential. It's not as behind the scenes oriented as a lot of other stuff. I cannot believe I'm on the panel with you guys. I'm gonna sit here and plug my show. You know what? Let's talk about Alf. Do it. Let's do
Let's
it
talk about
up.
Alf.
Let's do it.
Well, I'll say one last thing, and the whole Carrie as the dreamer, or some version of Carrie as the dreamer, is just something that is sticking. I haven't shook it. I haven't said no, and it's not like you have to say yes or no to these things, but it's really it really has an afterlife. And you said something about Cooper saying in part 16, like, I am the FBI, and you said that was similar to like a hero's catchphrase, like a Stallone type thing or a Rocky type thing.
It's the moment in the TV
And that
show.
was like that
Yeah.
made a big impression on me, and that sort of, I don't know, it's still lingering.
It's the moment in the TV show. It's the moment in the movie where the camera pans and the cop says blank. The hero says blank. And that moment for me was shattering, where I thought, like, that guy is a defense mechanism. That guy is a Jungian complex, right? He's a vessel for Jungian complex, both hero mythology, but really he's more than an archetype, a complex, which I think goes back to this scene that you're dealing in. I think it goes back to that scene that you're dealing in. I mean, I'm not, look, I'm not trying to suggest that they're not making up as they go along, but I'm comfortable with the retroactive nature of it, right? Because as we all are, it's like John says on his shows, he's going to take the media that's given, the explanations given, and then apply them to everything overall. That's what you're tasked with doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You either dig that type of media or you don't,
Yeah, and I'd say, like, just in general, it's like Twin Peaks, like, leaves enough room, like, where, like, they know where their instincts are, and then, like, how to narrow down their instincts, or like redefine their instincts, like as they get further. It's like Lynch, when he directs, it's like he doesn't exactly know why he's doing something, but then, like, in editing, he'll be like, oh, this is why this works for me. Like, it's like, I feel like, even though they don't know things, it still feels like the right kind of thing to do for this character. And, like, I'm basically just doing a yes and for what you just said. It's like,
well, no,
it
that's
all
an
goes
important thing.
backwards just fine, because
I was
of their
just sort of
attitude.
talking about this, about how can you tell the difference between good and bad surrealism, right? I mean, it sounds like a silly question to ask, but how can you tell the difference between good and bad surrealism, and why do you trust the instincts of David Lynch as opposed to any other surrealistic art where you would just go, well, I don't know if this is surrealism, or you just didn't come up with a narrative, buddy. And it sort of boils down to the confidence to feel like the person is doing something on purpose, right? That it's on purpose. Even when it's improvisational, it was the exact thing that needed to happen at the time. You'll follow that sort of confidence into hell, right? Now I just did a yes and to your yes and. This is all.
He did. Hey, you guys, I'm sorry, I gotta hop off.
Aw.
Can I ask
No,
you a
dang.
Can I
Yeah.
give me 30 seconds,
Okay.
please? And answer my question. It's the question of the show. So what happened what happened in room 315 in this scene? What happened here?
Is it a trick question?
No. Just it's.
What happened?
I know you have to leave, but can you squeeze in something?
I guess I don't, I'm such a literal person, Anthony. I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. Like, I mean, Cooper got shot. Is that, I mean, are you just asking
Yeah.
for the list of things that happened?
Yes.
He loves to do this to you where he asks you a
Yeah,
25-minute question, but
yeah.
he gives you 10 seconds.
So I think it is a transit. To me, there's a transition here. I think John may have said that. In room 315, in this scene in particular, it now sets Cooper onto figuring out what happened. How's that for a nondescript answer?
It was great.
There's like,
It was-
I mean, I think
works.
a lot of magic happened in that scene. A lot of things converge.
Interesting.
And I love it. I can watch it over and over and over again.
Thanks for making the time.
Thank you for inviting me. This was so great. Yeah.
Hope you didn't get fired today.
No, I didn't get fired.
Okay,
There's just a lot going on right now. But
You got it.
fortunately, movies have been not doing great, but we're starting to get a little busy. So yeah,
Fingers
it's a good
crossed.
thing.
Okay.
Yeah, fingers crossed. All right, you guys, I hope to see you soon.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
everybody.
Thanks again.
Bye.
That
I
was nice.
Actu-
Would anybody else like
actually-
to take the question? Patrick,
I
your
do
turn.
because I gotta leave too. So
Yeah.
I'll take I guess I'll
Yeah.
take it. I unfortunately have to dip. What happened in room 315? Cooper ordered a glass of milk and he chose to be like Maddie Ferguson and her cherry Coke and leave it and not drink it. That's what happened in room 315.
Nice to see you, man.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you all. Tommy, looking forward
Yeah.
to listening to your show.
Thank you, buddy.
Yep. All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks again. See you.
Yep. See ya.
Well, let's see. I'll take the question and then I'll dip.
Okay.
I'm going to take the question and stay. Just to,
Okay.
The first thing I'll say is what goes on what both Tommy and John were saying is this is the scene that outlines everything they were saying, right? With the phrase, a path is formed by laying one stone at a time. And that's how they worked. And, but they worked with such intention that, to go with what they were saying, it all coheres. But as for what happens in room 315 to me, that is when Twin Peaks becomes Twin Peaks, fully and truly, with that scene for me.
You gotta go?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm gonna dip.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for
man.
Mhm.
Pleasure to see you again.
And
Of course,
keep
I'll
me
ask you
posted.
again.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
man, for
I'll see
sure.
everybody.
Okay. Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Now what?
well, it's just us. Here we are.
Yep. Howdy.
Would anybody else like to take the question, or we could put that on hold if there's something else on your mind?
Yeah, you
I have
go.
no intention of dipping out. I'm standing my ground to the very end, pal. But
Okay.
But I think it's a nifty thought to consider that maybe the personal unconscious is intersecting with the collective unconscious, right? Something that is embedded from the let's call it the most dark and deep inside of you, the most fundamental inside of you, right? The personal unconscious and the collective unconscious is sort of overlapping, and now a complex from the collective unconscious has manifest. Not the first time you see something like that manifest in the show, but I think that there's a case to be made that that's what you're seeing, right? Because we didn't really touch base. This is the first real indication that you get that these things as an intervention mechanism will now start to supersede the story itself and push things forward. And then we see a lot of that moving forward, right? We particularly see a lot of that in the case of Dougie Jones. But, we see the firemen come back to reprise that. But it reads to me like a Jungian, like something manifest from the collective unconscious, something that's a bit more hereditary, fundamental than just your typical film archetype, right? Though it is that too. It works on a multitude of levels.
Were you interested in Jung or Twin Peaks first?
I had touched base with Jung for psych purposes, right? But in terms of interest, Twin Peaks, definitely Twin Peaks, right? Reading, listen, being informed by Mark Frost about what his let's call it his psychological dispositions are, right? That informed me to go, well, let's chase that road. And then, that Jung is obsessed with stories. That's the principle that if he makes a scientific claim, if he forwards a scientific position, it's that stories are as fundamental to you. They evolve, that are as much as part of evolution as everything else is. It predates you. It's, so whether or not you believe that, whether or not my personal reading of the way that everything works happens to be that, is beside the point, right? Like Frost believes that. And Frost is the largest majority of the lore. So I think that there's a case to be made. He would go and play in that domain, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I can buy into that, especially in the season 3 stuff. Oh, sorry.
Hey, man, can you hear us?
Oh yes, I can hear you perfectly well. I'm just
nice.
I'm just here soaking up the vibes.
Awesome, man. Very nice to see you.
I'm Señor Droolcup on Twitter. Give me just a minute. I'm going to my wife spent the whole day working very hard. She made me a wonderful dinner, and I'm going to honor her by not making her listen to me talk about Twin Peaks.
Awesome.
I'm just going to move to another room.
So I guess you're right, Anthony. I guess that look, we're lucky that we love to sit around and theorize. You know what I mean? I mean, look, we love to sit around, and I can't tell you.
You're talking about you and your wife, right?
Yeah, I can't tell you how many interviews we watched that you conducted, right? I can't tell you how many times that I repeated an episode that John, I'm up to date on his stuff, waiting anxiously for Firewalk with Me episodes to drop, right? What's the update there?
What's the update? Well, I've already talked to Scott Ryan, and Elle is a little bit tough to wrangle, but she and I are working on the codes and symbols in Twin Peaks, in Firewalk with Me. I mean, and we are slowly but surely piecing together this episode, and it's going to be pretty solid. But it's basically going to be, I think at this point I've got 8 episodes worth of topics, and we're just going to put them out one week after another once we finally get it done. But we're going to get it done first before anything.
Scott Ryan would hate everything about my show. My show basically equates to Lynch splaining. You know what I mean? I love Scott Ryan's work, and and he would call what I'm doing utter Lynch splaining at all times.
Hey, all good. He knows it takes all kinds of people, and
I can't wait.
That's right.
I can't wait to hear the series, man.
Yeah, I can't either.
Yeah, and Brian, this is John Bernardy. He has the Blue Rose Task Force podcast, and if you want a show that is, in my opinion, and I said this the other day, as packed with insights, minute for minute, I think nothing can top John's show. I mean, the amount of
I agree.
Okay, so you know already.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Big follower of John, and looking forward to trying Tommy's podcast as well.
Thank you so much
Cool.
for saying so. Yeah, I mean it's being so so adamant about listening to John's show, particularly John's show, that sort of drove my decision to create something so markedly different. You know, let's all try a theory on in real time. Let's see how long we can push the gas on this situation. You know what I mean? I didn't want to go the same route because I get so much value out of listening to John, you know.
Yeah, I had a similar situation where it was I got so much, yeah, I just got so much out of what John was doing, and John in particular, that I figured if I could give back like a little bit, if I could provide a little tiny bit of entertainment or or interest points to other people, then that would simply be
Well, I've told you
just
this before, and
that
I'll
would
say
be
it
the
again.
natural flow of things.
You're the best interviewer in what I call the peripheral fan made media of Twin Peaks. You're the best interviewer, hands down. The questions are open enough to really dig into stuff. You really find out how people think.
And speaking of which, thank you. And how did you get your screen name, Brian? Señor Droolcup
No,
ESQ.
absolutely. Exactly. No, I did what all good lawyers do. I gave that to myself. Just love the character, love the name from the first time that I saw it. So I try to use that as my social media avatar. I don't have a social media presence. I'm simply a fan and an admirer of all three of you. But try to use that as my avatar, and as a 53 something guy with a dad bod, I can get away with that.
Well, you're my favorite person on Twitter, whatever that's worth.
Thanks.
But
I'm a recovering rageaholic, so I just try to be nice to everybody on Twitter.
oh, okay, interesting. Has Twin Peaks aided the recovery?
Yes.
I'm asking. I'm actually literally asking dead seriously.
No, that's an interesting question. Well, I think the great thing about the Twin Peaks fandom is, especially I really didn't get into the show until really, I'm ashamed to say it, into the 2000s. And one thing that you realize when you become part of the fandom is that it's such an amazing array of totally different personalities. And whether you go to a Twin Peaks fest or, just I remember the electric feeling of when we were all at the concert at the Seattle Symphony early this year, and you realize that you're just part of something huge with people that you honestly might not have anything else in common with, except love of this show. And so it's a worldwide evener. I'm trying to think of the right word to use. Something that evens out all the other social and political arguments and makes us all get along with each other.
And yet, awkwardly enough, there must be a multitude of things that make us similar, right? Because
there's got to be
what a pointed specific flavor to hang your hat on, right? To go, this is my flavor. This is the thing that tastes best to me. Like there has to be a multitude of things, at least in the way that we theorize or we think, that's similar, even if we've reached vastly different conclusions about life.
Yeah, I can also say, I'm sure I'm not alone. One thing that actually kind of helped me on my rage recovery is I'm in the camp of people that didn't really understand David. We understood Twin Peaks. We may not have understood David Lynch as well. And so the return came, frankly, as a bit of a shock. People that were, I just wasn't sophisticated enough. I was expecting, basically something that would continue on from seasons 1 and seasons 2. And I was frankly pretty, oh my God, what the hell did you do to my favorite TV show? But then, I think John Bernardy kind of helped me in that recovery. You begin to look at is what is it that these writers and directors are offering you? There's something good here. Why don't you put aside your own pretensions and desires and try to understand it? And so I think that's something that helps in dealing with people too.
I know this doesn't really have anything to do with the scene specifically per se, but in a weird way, it does make the same suggestion and comment regarding media of its time, exactly as it did before. So in that way, it's like it's exactly the same property with exactly the same rules, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't matter if if you subscribe to the narrative as a linear narrative that happened to everybody, this world is real, or if you subscribe to the concept this is happening in somebody's mind, this somebody's active imagination, somebody's dream, whatever the case might be. Those rules are still taking that same media and doing what it did to it the first time again, right? So, you see Quentin Tarantino characters just get uprooted and perform a Quentin Tarantino scene right in the middle of the return, right? And you know that they're Quentin Tarantino-esque characters. You went into a Tarantino film all of a sudden starring Tarantino actors,
Yeah.
right? And it's the same hand that was played the first time. Our media is vastly different than it was when it was originally made. And that's not what you would use in your cognitive fugue now. And if you were unfortunate enough to have one, if you go into shock and you're pulling from all of these, various aspects, you would use the thing that's closest to you currently, right? That's the neatest trick. For me, that's the neatest trick. And maybe that's a way for me just to sort of blanket the whole thing and go, well, it's this loose Jungian logic. Maybe that's what I'm doing by doing so. But I think that it's a really neat trick to have to operate under those rules, loose as they are.
Do you talk in court? Is that the type of lawyer?
Yeah, I'm a
Lawyering that you do?
litigator, trial lawyer. Yeah.
Awesome.
So
Okay. I thought so. I just wasn't certain. I think I once encouraged you to slip some Twin Peaks stuff into one of your closing statements.
I do. As a matter
Have
as a
you
matter
done,
of
have
fact.
you, because when I first asked you, I think you said you wanted to, but hadn't yet. Have you since?
I have
Oh.
occasionally. I can't think of a good story off the top of my head for
Yeah.
you right now, but I still, although the show seems to be complete for the moment, like so many of us, I still live and breathe it daily, going through another watch through right now. So I absolutely try to slip a reference into legal arguments in court.
I think your
wherever-
best bet is to cap a phrase by saying, "You think about that, Tammy."
Yeah. I've also where it's easier and can be set up when I occasionally give talks to other lawyers, lectures for, continuing education, that kind of thing. And I'll usually try to slip in, or when I'm introduced, because they'll say, he went to this law school, he practiced this kind of law. Among his prominent clients are, and I'll usually, put in Ghostwood Development Company.
Nice.
Just in case one person in
That's
the
great,
audience.
man.
You never
Yeah,
know.
still waiting. Yeah.
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 You never know who's going to pick up on that. So, you're rewatching now?
Yeah. I'm going through kind of my first complete beginning to end. Went ahead and splurged on the Z to A. So almost finished with season 2 at the moment, and then go through it. Yeah.
Not to put you on the spot or anything, but is there anything different about your experience this time? Or
Oh,
like
yeah,
anything
of
that you're
course.
noticing or feeling or experiencing differently?
Yeah,
Generally or
absolutely.
specific?
I think just as you age more and get more world experience, we're all kind of dad aged. I don't like the word middle aged, but we understand so much more about the way the world is than when the show came out in the 90s. I was aware of it. I wasn't watching it religiously. When it first broadcast in the 90s, I was in college. But I think it's a show with so much depth, especially around human personalities. And frankly, one thing I can say as a lawyer is one thing I think that helps me appreciate the show. It like all good storytelling, it's about using archetypes that have appealed to people for 100,000 years and will still appeal to people 100,000 years in the future. And trial lawyering is kind of based on that too. But the other good thing about being a trial lawyer is you meet really crazy people, because those are the people that are pushy enough not to settle easily. So I've met plenty of Ben Horns and Leo Johnsons, maybe not that violent, but you meet crazy people, and a show like Twin Peaks, frankly, kind of helps you understand them, because you want to get to the stage. I'm taking your question and going a step further with it, but as a lawyer, you want to get to the stage where you can at least understand the motivations of the person on the other side, because that's really the only way you're going to settle with them, is by understanding what they want and then trying to find a way to give them something. So that's one great thing about Twin Peaks, is you begin to see all of these actors in this marvelous, supernatural, terrifying soap opera, that they're all real people, and they view themselves they view themselves as doing something good, or at least something righteous, in their minds. And I'll just say one thing. That's one thing I love about the way the lodge spirits were designed in season 1, season 2, is that their motivations and actual plans are kind of beyond human understanding. It's a bit dangerous to try to judge or interpret them, according to normal human designs.
Hubris, right? Hubris is the word.
There you go.
Right. Anthony, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Sure, I mind.
Okay. Do you guys feel like we're talking rewatches right now? That made me think about how often you rewatch. In particular, you, John, do you feel like you're in a constant state of rewatch because you're doing such in-depth analysis for your program?
Yes and no. I mean, I've only watched the season 3 stuff like once all the way straight through, and then the rest of it's just been like picking and choosing, and like okay, I'm working on this part today, so I need to work through this, and it's never been in order since the first time it aired on Showtime. But
interesting.
It's like what I was doing at the time was basically what you're doing now. I just happen to be doing it at 25 years later site.
Right,
where I was just like, kicking the tires on my theory and seeing how it held up under this and that and this and that.
Yeah.
A lot of word count. But like that's what I needed to do for that, is just kind of like, explore it in real time and just, poke at it over and over and experiment with it. So like it's less of a TV show narrative and more just like, okay, what is this? It's like I'm taking apart the car engine and, trying to rebuild it and see if it still runs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, this is probably my 10th iteration of an all-encompassing theory, all-encompassing the show, the film, the books, right? Even the guides. This would probably be, I mean, I've tried on a lot of theories. I've tried on, especially from those of us in the community that have written books, and things like this. Anthony, what about you? What do you you probably find yourself in a similar boat, right? Which is a boat that I'm sort of in, where I'm picking apart scenes for analytical purposes, as opposed to just watching chronological episodes one after the next, which, by the way, I do more than any rational human should do. I watch the show like 3 times a year, all of it, all of the show.
Yeah.
Like 3 times a year. I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
I was doing that when the gold box set came out, but I think when season 3 started airing, I had watched like the episodes that I'd watched the least was like maybe 14 times.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, the reason I picked this episode and proposed it to different people to discuss is because I started to watch it, I guess, 2 weeks ago, and I never got past the end of the scene because everybody started yelling at me in my house. And that was the first episode of Twin Peaks I watched in a year and 10 days or so. So I haven't seen a full episode in over a year.
The withdrawals are so bad.
I have no idea why.
Right?
What's that?
So the withdrawals are so bad, you knew
September
when the day
3rd.
was.
I know, September 3rd.
Yeah.
I actually watched the part 18 in my backyard from my pool. I remember exactly the day. But for whatever reason, I haven't watched it in a while. And then I didn't even get through that episode. But so I'm in like a different, I guess I'm in a different phase of my relationship with the show. But like Brian was saying, every day, it's like it's present
Yeah.
more, sometimes even more than you wish. But
Mhm.
it is
I'm
it is
learning that.
interesting because I wouldn't say manic, but I mean I was hyper obsessed, I guess. And then now it's
Well,
just
now
sort of a
there's a
different
few
phase.
years removed from when all of that fan made media was like very prevalent. So if you really wanted to ingest all of that, like there was so much of it. Guys like Cornpone, those guys have gone on to do other stuff at this point. But I mean, every single commentary YouTube people were out there doing, even the ones who had no interest in Twin Peaks previous to that are really their channel didn't relate to that sort of media or surrealism as a genre. Everybody had something to say. So if you wanted to be
Yeah,
involved with it, dude, you could lose your ever loving mind.
it's true.
And that by today's standards, it's like the guys who they really wanted to talk about it, they really wanted to analyze it. They can get a lot of mileage out of it just by doing one scene because there's a lot to be said for it. Those guys they're still there. But, it's not an accident that your guys' material was already the best material, because what you're doing in analyzing these things very specifically in the research that's involved proves itself to flesh out, really good content, really good programs. And like I said before, Anthony, you post questions where I get an impression of how somebody thinks. I can get an estimation as to how they logicize through a problem.
Yeah. And I'm just wondering and again, thank you. Um, I, I picked up on a compliment in there, and I
You did?
appreciate that.
You did?
Um,
That's all right.
and I'm wondering what Brian's day-to-day experience with Twin Peaks is, because you said it's sort of pretty prevalent in your life. Are
Yeah,
you reading a lot? Or are you just watching or thinking about it? Like, is it
mostly
in your
watching and thinking about
subconscious?
it. I would, it's like so many people, we all have plans for retirement that are never going to come to fruition. But among my plans are, I'm gonna sit down and, go through all of the, the many great videos and websites. As I go through, I'm sure like you, I try to keep notes. I've got hundreds of pages of notes from all of the rewatches, and it's interesting kind of looking back, like mistakes I had made or things that I had totally misinterpreted the first time, and updating those notes through each rewatch. And when you Google, like, wait, what did he say? Or what's going on here, and you Google something and you find a new website that way beyond Glastonbury Grove, or other of the original websites that people have made. It's also interesting to me that I think to really understand, like I said, to really understand Twin Peaks, you really have to understand David Lynch, which is something I wasn't really in a place to do when I first started watching the show. I've seen all of his movies now, which really helped me understand The Return much better. But I'm also often struck by how many of those people that are not, as you were saying, there are a lot of videos on YouTube, people that are not necessarily Twin Peaks fans. A name that comes off the top of the head, Pete Peppers, for example. I don't know that he's exactly a David Lynch fan, but a lot of his stuff, I just as an ordinary fan, I found very useful. His series on the rewatch. You have to learn to kind of take pieces of each of these. But ordinarily, for the really deeper level stuff, I think you've really got to be a David Lynch aficionado, which I'm not yet, but I'm on my way.
And it sounds like there's no stopping, or at least none in
Right,
sight.
not.
What
It's no known cure, as they say.
you called us all dad age. I think that's a nice term. Um, why are people around our age wa watching and thinking about this show like so much to this degree? I mean,
Yeah, it's very good.
it's a little bizarre.
I've shown it to my kids. They don't,
No offense to
appreciate
anybody in the
it.
room, because obviously myself included. Is it bizarre, or is it, or not really? What do you guys think?
Oh, I don't know.
Guess
Well,
not.
in terms of like the amount of people, or that there's a specific age demographic where people fall into that. Is that what you're asking about?
Just people at our age with lives to live. I think we all have a decent life going on, I would think.
Well, dude,
Devoting this level of time and
yeah,
emotion and
yeah,
thought
for
and
sure.
note taking, etc. Like, I guess it's just, it's maybe just a pastime or a passion or something, but
I think it has a lot to do with the fact that, look, I don't think a lot of us got to touch base at the time with the juggernaut that was Who Killed Laura Palmer, and I think so. A lot of people wanted to go back and they wanted to see what that was all about. I also think, clearly streaming allowed that that program, which so did not benefit from being what it was and the trailblazer that it was during the time on the network, benefits so wildly now in this serialized arena, right? That it helped, sort of usher in. It wasn't the first, but clearly it was the most definitive of the media that was made that was serialized that early on. And I also think that YouTube has a lot to do with it, as strange as that might sound, because I think that what happens, especially in the middle age place, I think there's a lot to do with the re-education of yourself, the cultural icon that you didn't really get to touch base with. So you go back and you start, and you can see people's mini documentaries on why things were important, right? So people fall down the rabbit hole into Twin Peaks from philosophy and from various occult and I'm talking about garden variety interest stuff, occult stuff, alien stuff, and then maybe just cultural stuff in general. I think YouTube is a big proponent of that. So it's not just for us who like it, and then we seek out the YouTube creators who create things about it. You know what I mean? But it's also for people who go, what the hell was all that about? Right? Why was that such a big deal? And you see those videos. Why was Twin Peaks so great? Was Twin Peaks as good as it says it was? That kind of, you see that. And you fall down that rabbit hole and you go, wow, that's crazy. That looks like a lot of this stuff. And they tell you, like, hey, did you know David Chase was very influenced by, and then you start to put things together for yourself, and there you are. So I think we're the people who go back to re-educate ourselves and catch up with that which we missed when we were busy,
I could see that, John.
I think the streaming angle like really counts for something. And like this isn't just our demographic, but like if you were around when Netflix was like the biggest thing in the whole universe, like before they even really started their own programming. Like I'm thinking about Matt and Ashley from Twin Peaks. Like they were college aged when they found it, but they found it through streaming, just like Joel Bocko did, where it's like you're catching up on all the classic stuff, and it's like all the people that were checking out Moonlighting recently, or Northern Exposure, or like now Homicide: Life on the Street. It's like all these things. It's like, oh man, I heard about this, and here it is. So like I think that's a lot of people's things, but like like we were probably of that age where like that we were in a good point in our lives where watching TV and catching up on things like Twin Peaks is probably a good thing. But I don't know, I was there though, so like I've got childhood trauma on my side. It's like I've never
those are some of my favorite episodes are listening to him get into his trauma about
but like ever since
John, your
like,
trauma is our enjoyment.
Yeah.
but it's the best of all of our enjoyment, John, so it's fine.
But like I'm one of those cases where like it's like if you're there and you saw it, like it's gonna stick with you just because it was so different from everything else too. So like I don't know, but you think about like Brad Dukes. He was a couple of years younger than me watching it. Andrew Grievous started 25YL because he was 5 when he watched it. There's something about watching it before you're ready to watch it that like really imprints, and I'm that crowd.
And also to your question, Anthony, then it's just because look, I mean, from us being in this bubble, like this is how I spend my leisure time. I would be watching or listening to something that you guys are doing, right? So now if I wasn't making stuff myself or cutting clips or whatever having to do with Twin Peaks, I would be watching you guys do it, right? So that's what I do. I don't know necessarily if our bubble is nearly as big as the next guys, right? The next media, the next property, like is Twin Peaks really as big as the next thing that people are catching on to in today's market? I don't know that or not. So with that said, I think a lot of it also has to do with your ability to handle your or seek out or enjoy surrealism. It's a hell of a question about whether or not you're the type of person who can deal with that. Some people, I mean, you know how it is. You know how it is when you turn on people to anything David Lynch, and they cannot handle the concept that the narrative will not be explained to them. They just can't. They can't handle that. They can't deal with it, right? Or they won't. It's that they won't deal with it.
Well,
That's just some people's predilection. So we're all
yeah,
we're all avowed.
but I think maybe I can't handle that because I think the reason that I get so hooked in and perhaps addicted at times in and out is the mystery is just ever present. It's endless, and the desire to try to make sense out of things, all the while knowing that it's probably not going to happen,
Never.
is ever present. For example, and I'm going to actually transition because I'm going to have to go to sleep soon. But for example, the title for today's thing is What Happened in Room 315. And it's just one of those like epic questions in my mind from the show. There are probably five to 10 of them. This is one of them. And it just keeps me hooked, so much so that I talked to 6 or 7 or 8 different people tonight about that question. And I'm still going to go to bed without knowing the answer to it. Not without having a satisfactory feeling, but having a lot more to think about. So with that said, Brian or John, can you share the real answer? Can you share your thoughts? What happened in this scene?
You tell
Anthony,
us right now. Tell us.
I'm gonna, as a person that's also, and I think one of the reasons that Twin Peaks has been successful is it really appeals to obsessive compulsive people like Anthony and I that love to just go down every rabbit hole. But a great liberation came to my soul at the Seattle Symphony Twin Peaks concert back in February when Kyle MacLachlan said, David's films are meant to be felt, not understood. And I think that was license for me at least. Just stop worrying about it.
And it's it's funny you say that because earlier you were talking about just maybe being more angry in the past or whatnot, and I could tell you that the show for me personally made me feel things that I hadn't felt either in a while or maybe just never. So it was really a nice way to maybe I'm in my head too often. I don't know if I am, but it's basically connected to every part of my human like body, like it maybe in equal measure, total heart, gut, head, skin, hairs, like really like a little everything. So it just hit, like it checked every box on that, like I don't know, reminding me that I'm a full human being or something. Not that you don't know that consciously, but it made me feel all of it. So that was probably how it got the hooks into me.
Yeah, especially for we're all in American culture, we're all kind of addicted to film things on the screen, and it makes up a great deal of our life, and we've all had very emotional experiences with conclusions of shows, or how we all felt when this happened in that famous show, and it's what we all gather around the water cooler talking about Monday morning. But I think there is something about Twin Peaks that just brings that to a whole nother level, where it's for me, I remember that feeling the very first time watching the final episode of season 2 when I watching it on syndication in the mid 2000s, and just looking at my watch and, oh my God, this whole thing's going to be over in 15 minutes. How can this be?
Yeah, how can they wrap this up?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And we've come to the end of this long road, but I got to say, and again, I'm perfectly comfortable with people that say, look, I don't like this. It's not my thing. I have no interest in whatsoever.
Yeah.
That's fine. But if you appreciate it, you understand this is really, really high production quality. I mean, it's the old saying that, look, this was television, and for the first time with movie quality actors and writing and direction and all that. But even for that, wow, you really, the more time goes on, you really appreciate the incredible level of talent and how it all just came together. We see that in trial lawyering all the time. You have you can bring in the best group of attorneys, and sometimes it all meshes and everything is just clicking, and it's a fantastic feeling because trial lawyering is like putting on a play. That's how I explain it to people. And a lot of times it doesn't, and you can have the greatest level of talent, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't click together. But wow, for those 2 seasons, and I'm sure I'll have to read the books on the production of the show in season 1 and season 2. There were all kinds of obstacles and stress, like there is in any endeavor in life. But man, they really
Gotta go get your Brad Dukes on.
Yeah.
Hey, I can't wait to hear your show. "Quote unquote," I'm legally not allowed to tell you this.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't wait to listen to that show.
Exactly.
I'm gonna have to run in a couple minutes, but John, would you like to answer the question of the day?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, like Cooper was already able to kind of reach into this other world while living in this place that wasn't his own home. It's in between, like, hotel, motel, like whatever you call it. The many rooms, not a home among them. And he was this close to being able to pass through because of an injury. And because of this, because of a wood tick, he was able to get help. Like, it was sort of a call for help in a weird tangential way. And I think the thing that I'm most curious about is, how did that help basically congeal into this final moment before Ronette wakes up, where there's this gold ball that gets passed from this thing giving him help into Cooper's throat.
What is that gold ball?
That light that, it's like right at the end, like, it's like,
No, I know the scene, but what is
light.
it?
I don't know.
Oh,
That's
okay.
that's what I'm super curious about.
What
Like,
does your feeling tell you that it might be?
I don't know. I kind of feel like it's an answer that, like, it has to be worked through, like, physically, like through Cooper's body in order to get through his voice. Because it's not up here. It's not through the third eye. It's through here. And, like, yeah, it's like, it's just like everything else. You got to have time to
That's
process
interesting.
things.
That's located halfway between the head and the heart. So maybe it's some sort of
Yeah.
combination of the two, which is somewhat how David Lynch defines intuition in a way.
Yeah.
Interesting. Maybe.
It's right in the
Maybe.
middle, just like everything else, in between things.
I had
Yeah.
this weird idea where John does a podcast that's just as stoic, just as analytical, and just as dead ass serious about the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, right? And he just right down the barrel of the microphone, man, as stoic as can possibly be. We don't say the word canon. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Well, I have a collection of sonnets written about the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So
Awesome.
if you or John wanted access to that collection, I'd be happy to share.
I knew
And
it. I knew. There's no doubt in my mind.
There's a
Yeah,
wonderful
this-
person. Sorry, there's a wonderful person on one of the Twin Peaks Facebook groups that I met at Twin Peaks Fest. She lives in Snoqualmie. Her name's gone right out of my head. But not only is she a great Twin Peaks expert, she also does a podcast on Dallas
Awesome.
called the Ewing Family Barbecue, which I've never listened
Nice.
to. I'm
yeah,
not a fan of Dallas, but it's just what we're into, man. You gotta
there
love
you
it.
go. So the precedent is there, John. So you're gonna have to think about this. You're not busy enough. That's what we know.
Oh no, I'm not going to be able to start anything for like what, at least 2 years at this point. So I guess that means next week you'll see the first episode.
But I just can't wait. It's like
Hoping
just an
so.
hour. Just an hour of him asking, "Why did Will diss his girl?" You know what I mean?
Oh
Like,
God.
I'm a
This-
big SpongeBob fan, and it's I try to tell my kids, because we used to watch SpongeBob together when we were kids, and I'm trying to explain to them, look, these basic characters are the same. It wasn't cartoons, but if you went back 10,000 years ago, Greek mythology, Roman mythology. My dad always tried to explain this to me. I didn't understand it, but like these are super basic characters, and they're telling stories that resonate with people. So
it's interesting.
That's
that
interesting.
You continue to bring that up. I mean, in the heart of my theory, I don't just believe that that's the device by which you're watching a show, because that's the device by which you watch any show. I literally believe that that is the device that makes the show operate. That's what the show's in reference to, are the archetypes, right? The show is itself the personal unconscious drama. I've said it, and I've said it.
nope, keep saying it.
I'm gonna well, he's gonna keep saying it on his own show, and I can guarantee that, because I talk to him here and there, and I'm really looking forward to where that show goes. But I'm gonna have to go to sleep. But I've long thought that if Twin Peaks was animated, it's by the same maybe by the same animator that created SpongeBob, or like Spirited Away. I think the show wouldn't be so challenging, because I think it's the human beings having these experiences, with actual skin and bones, that creates like a little bit of a block. But if they were just animated characters having the exact precise same plot line, it would probably be a lot easier to process. That's just my
you make this interesting. You just said all animation by its sheer nature, surrealism, all of it.
Yeah.
For me, this scene just opened up, like it opened up the wonder again. Not that it was leaving the show, but it like reignited the mystery, and it like strategically plants like 5 or 6 new questions in the reader's mind. So it's very persuasive the way it gets its hooks in you. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I guess the mystery is something that is just at the heart of the show for me. And it was also a bit of a mystery tonight, because I had the Zoom link out there, and it was like, who's going to show up? And people showed up in a staggered fashion, and I'm so glad you did. And I really appreciate it, John. I told you, man, you were the number one person I was hoping to talk to today, and I'm glad you made the time for me. And Tommy, great to see you, man. And
I'm sure I'll text you
Señor?
within the next 20 minutes talking to you about something that Jung said.
I'm gonna go to sleep. Señor, it's an honor. Thanks so much for making the time.
As an ordinary fan, to all three of you, I just want to say thank you for entertaining and helping us all understand this.
And I'll see you guys, I guess, somewhere in the internet.
Yep.
Somewhere
Good
in
night.
the
Yeah. Good night, everybody.
Good
Thanks
night.
again.
Good night, gentlemen.
Really, really appreciate it. Okay.
Imaginamic be in your dreams.
Consider it done.
Yeah. Good night.
Good night, guys.